after you have spoken to the system only allows one microphone to be in use at one time. The red light means that your microphone is on and the camera will automatically pan towards you. Please also note that the microphones should not be moved. Please speak directly into the top of the microphone and try to avoid turning your head away when speaking. And we're obviously doing some live webcam work as well with Teams. So hopefully the gremlins won't interrupt with that and everything will run smoothly, I hope. So if I move to item 1 on the agenda, please. Apologies, Ms. Watson.
Yes, Chairman. Tonight we have apologies from Councillors Adkins, Gorringe and Trite.
Thank you. So if I move to item 2 on the agenda, the minutes to confirm and sign from the meeting held on the 25th of April 2022. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Could I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Brown. All members in favour? Thank you, members. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does any member have a declaration of interest they wish to declare at this point? Thank you, members. If something should come to light in the course of the meeting, then please make me aware. Thank you. Item 4, Chairman's update. Land charges update from a note provided by Ms Grace Evans. So the Land Charge Services update for the Chair of Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee, Chairman's announcement. We received a report from the Land Charges Service at our March meeting explaining action taken by the service and improved search response times. I've received a further and progress update as follows. At the March meeting, the February search response times were reported as an average of 26 working days. During March, response times continued to improve, reducing to an average of 16 working days. During April, the response times remained at an average of 17 working days due to the bank holidays and Easter holidays staff absence and a few days planned system downtime for the final migration. The response time published on the Dorset Council website remains at 20 average working days, and this continues to be updated fortnightly. The number of search requests received during March and April increased significantly from search numbers in January and February 2022. In February, they were 721. By March, they'd increased to 1,029, and in April, we received a further 857. These search numbers remain higher than pre-pandemic and are at a similar level to the number of search requests made in the same months in 2020 when the stamp duty holiday was in place. With continued effort of the team and target setting, the rate of improvement experienced to date is expected and planned to continue in coming months. And members, I think we will continue to keep an eye on that, and we'll have continued reports coming to us. If I move to agenda item 5, public participation. Ms Watson, do we have any questions from the public?
No questions from the public on this occasion.
Thank you. And I'll move to agenda item 6, questions from members. Ms Watson, do we have any questions from members?
No questions from councillors at this meeting, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Watson. So I move to agenda item 7, plans for the summer operations in Dorset. Members will have read the report and note that the recommendations are 1, to note the progress made on actions contained in the improvement action plan which was produced as a result of experience of summer 2021, and 2, to review the proposals for managing high visitor numbers to Dorset during summer 2022, and 3, subject to the above, support the proposals as outlined. Presenting, I have Mr Graham Duggan, Head of Community and Public Protection. Could I ask Mr Graham Duggan to give his report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Could I also introduce Jane Biscombe, the clerk at Weymouth Town Council, who's come along this morning to give an external perspective outside of the council for how summer operations have taken place over the past 2 years. I'll briefly run through the report before passing back to yourself, Chairman, for any questions that your committee may have. One of the consequences of the COVID pandemic were the restrictions on travel abroad, and in the years 2020 and 21, Dorset became a destination of choice for many visitors to the coastline, and unprecedented numbers came into Dorset during those 2 years. This created some situations in terms of visitor numbers and our ability and town council resorts' abilities to manage numbers and also our tourist destinations. For 2020 and 2021, a plan was drawn up based on some of the experiences of 2020, and particularly one of those was the disastrous Wareham fire that took place in Wareham Forest. Agencies came together to prepare a multi-agency response plan to manage the additional visitor numbers, and this was in place and worked well during 2021, and your committee received a report on that work at your January meeting. At that meeting, you asked that a survey be undertaken of some of our external partners who worked with us during those 2 previous summers to get their views about how the work had gone, and the results of that survey are included in the report this morning. You also asked for a brief on the plans that were being put in place for 2022, and that's the other purpose of this report, is to cover that for you. So just looking at the previous year's work, you asked for an improvement plan from the experiences of 2021, and the updated improvement plan is appended to the report, and I think we can say that there's been generally good progress with the work that's been undertaken there. And some of the lessons learned from the last 2 years have been incorporated into the plans this year. In relation to the survey of other agencies and partners who worked with the council during the previous 2 summers, that the results of that survey are also appended to the report. But in summary, in paragraph 2.2 of the report, and I'll just read from it, the results were that overall there was a positive impression of the council's handling of summer operations. In particular, respondents had a strong net positive agreement that the council kept people safe during the period. Although showing a net positive response, there was a more mixed response to some questions, and some parish and town councils felt that they should have been more involved in the plans. And I think that probably reflects the focus that was given to the resort locations in Dorset, and some of the more inland town and parish councils probably were not as engaged as those resort town councils. So looking at the plan for summer demand in 2022, there's a link at paragraph 3.1 directly into the report, into the operational plan for this spring and summer. The main features of the plan are very similar to what was put in place for last year, but perhaps scaled back, because we do anticipate this year that we won't see the peak of numbers in Dorset that we saw last year, simply because the foreign travel restrictions have by and large been removed. So whilst numbers will perhaps not peak at those levels, we do still anticipate a very busy summer in Dorset, and visitor levels above what we would anticipate or say would be business as usual. There is a very big events calendar for Dorset and BCP councils over the summer months, and we're also getting reports from hotel and bed and breakfast accommodations that bookings are strong. There's a feeling of people doing catch-up on lost holidays and lost short breaks to areas such as Dorset. So the main elements of the summer operations plan for this year, firstly, is a multi-agency summer delivery group, and that consists of officers representing key council services such as highways, tourism, environmental health. We also link in with Dorset Police and have links to the health and fire services as well. That multi-agency group will meet on a weekly basis and has already started meeting weekly to anticipate the events that are coming up and to make sure that the necessary resources are in place. We also have a RAG calendar, a red, amber, green rated calendar, which highlights those weekends, particularly the weekends and bank holidays, which we think will be particularly busy over the summer months. And that will guide the deployment of resources, not just for the council, but particularly for Dorset Police as well. And we will work together to ensure that the resources are located in those high priority areas. And then the last main plank of the operations plan is the multi-agency command centre. This is a virtual command centre. It's provided to us by an experienced contractor, and it acts as a communications hub during those particularly busy periods, a port of call, a one-stop shop for communications, where we can get the right messages to the right services very quickly to respond to any issues that are coming up. We are being supported by some additional funding for this summer. It's certainly not as much as last year, but there is some welcome funding which officers are working with our partners to use this funding to bolster services in key areas and also to enhance some services, particularly again in those tourist destinations and tourist hotspots. So at paragraph 4.1 in the report, you can see a short table which indicates where some of that funding has already been allocated. We anticipate and will work hard to make sure that Dorset has a good, busy and safe summer series of events and that the summer progresses well. Again, I am sure there will be points of learning that come from this year. And we will also need to look at what business as usual looks like going forward. As travel patterns fall back to more of a business as usual, what are the implications for our area and what level of resources and what level of planning do we need to put in place in future years in terms of making sure that we deliver a joined up approach to managing visitor numbers in Dorset. So one issue that you may want to consider this morning is about having perhaps a review of how summer 22 went and any lessons that we can take from that to build into our future years planning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan. If I can just now briefly move to a guest that we have with us this morning in the chamber, Miss Jane Biscombe, who's the Town Clerk for Weymouth Town Council, for you to speak about your experiences in Weymouth. Okay, thank you, and welcome to the committee, Miss Biscombe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you all today. I was involved in the Summer Operations Group as one of the representatives from the key coastal town and parish councils. So I represented Weymouth, Lyme, Swanage and Bridport, and my fellow clerks in Lyme, Swanage and Bridport also attended the meetings on occasion when I wasn't able to. So it was a really good piece of partnership working between the parish and town councils, as well as with Dorset Council itself. I have to say that the level of engagement on this project was excellent and exemplary of what can be achieved by councils at different tiers working together. As town and parish councils, we were included not only in the planning and the operations, but also in the wrap-up and the seeing what lessons could be learnt for future years, and not just within this project, but for projects across the scope of both councils' work. Town and parish councils had an opportunity to step up and show we are able to join with Dorset Council, Health, the police as key delivery partners on a very local level. And we do hope that that will continue not only for the Summer Ops project, but for other projects in the area that we can assist, support and help partners deliver their key objectives along with ours. I have to say there was a really good level of trust and respect shown between all partners, and I really did feel that town and parish councils were a very much respected and key part of that project. So I didn't feel that we were just there to tick a box. We were really included, and I felt our expertise was very well engaged with. At times, there was an overestimation on what could be delivered by the limited staff teams at the town and parish councils. However, these were really quickly and easily addressed at the regular online meetings and resolved very positively for all concerned. So I think there was a great deal of learning around capacity and what could be delivered by each partner. And I'm sure that that will really stand us in good stead for future years working. Town and parish councils who were involved, so it was very much the key coastal councils, are extremely grateful to Dorset Council for the level of joint working to support us all in managing the huge number of visitors we had to ensure their health and safety, as well as developing Dorset resorts as destinations of choice for domestic visitors, which in turn contributes to the ongoing economic development in these coastal areas, which do have certain challenges around the level of income, the level of employment and social mobility. So whilst this project was very much focused on the summer operations, it had wide-ranging implications for the town on a much wider scale, something that was very welcomed and I do hope will continue in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Piscombe. That was a very informative and detailed account of how you felt the summer went, which was really pleasing to hear. And being a strong advocate of partnership working between Dorset Council and Town Parish Councils, it was very pleasing to hear just how well the officer teams had done working with your Town Council. That was great. Thank you. I'm now going to move members to invite any non-committee members to ask any questions or to make any comments on the report. Do I have anything from non-committee members? Councillor Alford.
This one's working.
Thank you, that's very kind. In the paper, somewhere it mentions the idea of the reassurance of local communities. Now, it seems to me that that is a very significant objective of the work that's described in this paper. Not exclusively, not the sole objective, but a very significant one. I would just wonder if the committee would agree with that.
Committee members, I think we would agree with that. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Duggan, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. I think there is some learning for us in the way that we were particularly focused towards the coastal resorts and town councils and parish councils. And I appreciated the feedback from the survey that was conducted through Peter Jackson that indicated that other town and parish councils perhaps felt less involved. And I think there's a learning for us there in terms of reassurance of local communities and the messaging that we do. So I understand Councillor Alford's point. I think we need to ensure that we adopt a bit of a broader approach to ensure that partners across Dorset and councils across Dorset, if not actively engaged, are aware of the work that is taking place. And a route of that is through the Dorset Association of Town and Parish Council meetings, which I know some updates were provided at. But I think we can take that away and look at how we link better specifically on this work over the summer.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan. I think it was understandable that there was a focus on the coastal regions due to the fact that we do, well, it is the Jurassic Coast. It is a World Heritage Site, so it's understandable that the view was that the numbers coming into Dorset would be visiting the coastal areas, and that we support some of the best beaches that are in the country as well. Thank you. So, do I have any other non-committee members who wish to speak at this time? Okay, so if I now move to questions from the committee, please. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got 4 questions, but I don't know if you want them one at a time and you get an answer one at a time. one at a time. First one is on 3.1, summer demand. And I know you've mentioned that we have a large number of bookings this year in the holiday parks, etc. My problem is that a lot of people with this financial crisis are not going to be able to go abroad, not even going to be able to book holiday parks because they're very expensive as well. And so we're going to be going to have a lot of day trippers as we did back in the first pandemic and the second pandemic. So I don't think it's wise that we scale back the summer 2022 operation because we're going to need it. It's very important that we make sure that we've got the resources in place. And if we've only got a limited budget, what do we do when we've spent it? Do we just stop the service? So that's my question.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand your concern over that. We're in one of those areas of the unknown, aren't we? Mr. Duggan, I'm afraid that falls with you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think it's a very good question. The economic climate at the moment will have implications for the visitor profile to Dorset over the next few weeks and months. Whilst the actual budget is less this year, because we are using the remnants of COVID grant funding from government, and that is limited. This is the last of that funding. I think the way in which agencies have pulled together and have developed those working relationships means that it's not just about the budget. It's about how we work together smarter, how we communicate better. And I think those lessons have been learned, and I think they've come through in the improvement plan today that is before you. So I think if members of the Summer Operations Group were here, aside from Jane next to me, I think they would say that it's that experience of working together and anticipating the issues and responding to them quickly where we need to that is the big benefit, and that's not solely budget driven. But I do understand the councillor's point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan. Are you happy with that, Councillor Andrews?
Yeah. It's better. Had the same trouble yesterday. Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. So my second question is on risk assessment. And both assessments have been deemed medium risk. Did that take into account the cost of living crisis and what's likely to happen this summer?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The cost of living crisis is developing quickly, and the implications aren't fully known yet. Certainly, it's something that we're very aware to, and it is being discussed at the operations group's meetings, which now are on a weekly basis. And it's certainly an issue which will be monitored carefully. And we work closely with BCP, who have some dedicated visitor software profiling, and that provides us with really real-time information about visitor numbers and where the visitors are coming from, and how long their stays are generally for. So that's really helpful to enable us to shift resources quickly. But it is an issue. And we always have the ability to change our internal risk level on a daily or weekly basis. So if the operations group anticipates significant issues coming up, our risk will change. And we can certainly, through the normal means, members will be made aware of that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think that's bit of weather dependent as well, especially during the school holidays, so we've got to keep a close eye on the weather. My next one is Appendix 1, D 3.2. Out of hours duty officers number. Can we make sure that town and parish councils, etc., have that number, the hours, because sometimes it's very difficult to find the outer hours duty officers number on the website. So I think if town and parish clerks all got that, probably Weymouth town clerks already got that, but I don't know if the Sherborne Town Clerk, for instance, has got that, just in case we do all of a sudden have 100,000 people turn out to the castles on one day. You know? So just a thought, that's all.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Communications are really important, especially for elected members, for councillors. It is an issue which I know has been raised, and some work has been taking place through our emergency planning colleagues to make sure that the right protocols are in place for elected members during the summer period.
Thank you, John. Before you go to your next question, can I just move to Councillor Took for his question? I know you've got one more. Did you want to ask a question at this point? I thought you indicated to ask. You won't? Okay. Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, final one. D3.5 on Appendix 1. Duty rotor with Gypsy and Travellers and the duty officer. It says should. Should it not read will?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, there's an update to the wording in the report today. There will be an out-of-hours Gypsy and Traveller liaison officer who can work typically in conjunction with Dorset Police to help resolve those tricky situations.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? That brought to my attention because local to us 5 miles away in Yeovil, the rugby club got invaded the other day by Travellers and Gypsies. So they are on the move, so we need to be aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Took, Cranbourne and Alderholt Ward. Just three things I want to raise, really. First of all, a question about the May the 3rd bank holiday just gone, which I noticed wasn't on your RAG report. You sort of skipped over it. But what was the experience on that holiday? I don't know what the weather was like then. It wasn't particularly brilliant.
Can you talk to the microphone? Sit down and talk to the microphone. We can't get out here. It's the only way to do it, sit down.
I'll sit down then. It's far more comfortable. So what was, were there any issues on the May the 3rd bank holiday? And if I can just go through a couple of other questions. On page 16, A3.9, you talk about getting extra resources and putting resourcing in place. Resourcing in progress or in process, it says on the report. How's that going? What resources have been recruited, and what sort of costs are we expecting for those resources? And the last point is that a lot of the issues that we had in previous years were down to human waste being left in inappropriate places. Is there any consideration to our ability to deploy some chemical toilets in car parks, in addition to any existing public toilets? Because it seems in the past that they simply got crowded out. So if we can just address those 3 points, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The first point was in reference to the last bank holiday period. And from memory, that progressed well. There were no issues which couldn't have been anticipated. Visitor numbers were around about average, I think, on reflection. Obviously, we're looking forward to the next bank holidays now with the Queen's Jubilee, which will be significantly busier with street parties and other events that are taking place. So I think the only specific issue that we've had up until now was a sudden event that appeared as on MOD land, which was a rave stroke festival that appeared very quickly, and Dorset Police and Council and the MOD worked effectively to persuade the organisers of that event to discontinue and to leave the area. On the second question around staff resources, that is a concern. Certainly in 2020 and 2021, the intensity of the issues that were thrown up by the visitor numbers did require long periods of focused working of officers, not just in the council, but within town councils and other agencies as well. I think the lessons we learned from that, in terms of putting the right structures in place, has helped us manage our resources better. And we're certainly from a council perspective, and I think from the police as well, feeling confident this year in terms of the level of resourcing that's available and our ability to move resources around to where the requirements are in the area. And lastly, with respect to toilet provision, it is a standing item on the weekly summer demand group agenda, along with facilities. So we do keep a watch on that. And if we were getting reports coming in to say that there was incidents of public urination and issues like that were being reported, and those typically would come in from the police or from town and parish councils, we are able to look at those issues and to see what we can do about it. And that could include the addition of portable resources to help ease those problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're satisfied, Councillor Took? You're satisfied? The answer, thank you. Councillor Canning.
Sorry. Yes, I think I'd just like to raise an issue about the chemical toilets, that they are not necessarily a brilliant solution. Just recently, in the Great Field in Dorchester, they were used to make up for increased visitor numbers to the opening of the big play area that's happened recently. And unfortunately, in after hours, when there were a few people around, the toilets were to be turned upside down and moved all around the place, and ended up creating more of a mess than they actually would have been if they had not been there in the first place. And I think we have to be careful of where we deploy them, and there needs to be supervision so that there's somebody around who can keep an eye on them and make sure they can't be stigmatised and damaged.
Did you wish to come back on that point, Graham? Mr. Duggan?
Only just to say that certainly that is an issue, and Jane sitting next to me has experience of that in Weymouth Town Centre. How we've looked to deal with this, and using Weymouth as an example, is to work with the town council to see if we could open them permanent facilities for longer and help with the cleansing and the issues of vandalism in terms of having our security officers around the location. It is a significant issue, and it's one that we will constantly be responding to.
Thank you. Well, it is a serious matter. Moving swiftly on from that topic of conversation, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two parts as well, if I may. The first is my ward, which is almost entirely the Chesil Beach, is a very popular area for camping. Are we going to continue with the short-term temporary licenses for camping that we've had for the last 2 years? Because I foresee an awful problem with the wild camping which we had on the beaches at places like West Bexington, where at times there were over 100 families camping on the beach. And also, as part of that, Chairman, it may be something that we need to look at, is the difficulty in getting increasing difficulty in getting planning permission from landowners who want to establish campsites in that area, particularly because of the mitigation requirements of Natural England for the Chesil Beach. So it may be something we need to look at in planning terms if we're wanting to extend our offer of hospitality for campers. But could you, that's the first bit about, and shall I ask the second one now, or should we deal with this one first?
If we could deal with this one first, please. Yeah, it's a very good question. Mr. Duggan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. The camping on beaches was a significant feature during 2020 and 2021. The issue has been recognised, and the council has recently approved public space protection orders, which do include a provision on unauthorised camping along areas such as Chesil Beach. There's another tool in the toolkit for people who are camping, particularly those who are causing nuisance, and that could be noise nuisance to nearby residents. It depends where they put themselves, but also the litter and detritus which is left when people leave. So the order will come into effect very shortly, and we will ensure that officers from council services are keeping an eye on those areas. We will also respond to complaints, and we can, if necessary, issue fixed penalty notices for a repeated offence such as that.
Camping permits?
It's not within my bag of services, but I will take that away from here and speak to my planning colleagues to look at that. And it's also a housing issue as well, because I think the housing service are responsible for licensing campsites as they're legally classed as temporary housing. So I will take that away to housing and planning colleagues, councillor, and I'll ask them to respond to you directly.
So just before we come back, Councillor Roberts, Councillor Took, did you wish to say something at this point relating to this? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, my understanding is that farmers with fields can set up pop-up campsites for a limited number of days without planning permission and without particularly getting licensed. Is that correct?
That was certainly correct during the peak of the COVID pandemic under emergency COVID legislation, with government anticipating that there would be exceptional pressure on tourist hotspots and resorts. I have to admit, I don't know the answer as to whether those relaxations are still in place. So unless anybody else knows in the chamber, I'll take that one away and get back to you, councillor, to let you know. A lot of the additional COVID legislation has now been repealed.
Thank you.
Mr. Selgren.
Chairman, members, thank you. I also don't have a briefing on that, to detail that matter this morning, as Mr. Duggan said. I think what it would be useful if that is recorded in the minutes. I think this committee wants to make some recommendations, perhaps in terms of policy moving forward. What we can then do, with your approval, Chairman, is have a note to go with those minutes that effectively answers the question. We haven't had the information to hand for you this morning, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Thank you. Councillor Roberts, you wish to come back again on your second question?
Yes, I mean, my first question was precisely that, about the temporary ones. My second question, and this is particularly, I think, for our guests from Weymouth. I'm aware during conversations with the Portland Port Chief Executive that they are possibly expecting somewhere around 66 cruise liners, which could total 250,000 visitors. Are we factoring that into our visitor numbers? And how are we trying to encourage them to spend in Weymouth and not disappear off to Stourhead and other sites?
Thank you, Chair. Thank Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Those have been factored in. We try and work as closely as we can with the cruise providers as well as Portland Port. We work very closely with colleagues in Dorset Council Tourism and with Weymouth Bid, now termed We Are Weymouth, who are working very hard along with ourselves and our partners on trying to keep people in Weymouth and making sure there's a really good offer that is understood by people when they come off the buses in Weymouth town centre. There are a few issues with some of the cosmetics at the moment in the area where visitors are dropped off, and we're working with Weymouth Bid and Dorset Council to try and resolve those so that people's first impressions of Weymouth are positive, of a vibrant, exciting seaside destination where they want to stay and spend their money. Last year, there was a band of amazing volunteers who met people as they alighted from the coaches and gave them information, helped with wayfinding, and we very much hope that will continue this year. But at this stage, Chairman, I'm afraid I don't have an update on that. But again, another really good bit of partnership working was the wayfinding for cruise ship passengers. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts, are you satisfied? Thank you. Yes, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of sort of points. The first is, and this is me just making a point, I fully understand why people want to come on holiday in Dorset. It is the best place to holiday in the UK, and I think we would all be great advocates for that. And rightly so, this report focuses on some of the negatives that can come out of tourism and that affects our residents. But I just want to understand from the officers how we balance some of those negatives of excessive tourism against the long-term benefits of, particularly around supporting local business, the jobs that tourism provides, and getting that right. Because if you live in Dorset, you know that you don't go to Lulworth Cove on a beautiful bank holiday summer day when the sun is shining, because you won't be able to park within 20 nautical miles of the place unless you have a boat. But if you are doing a long weekend from somewhere up country, you may not be aware of that. So how do we manage those conflict points in a way which is customer focused, allows us to make Dorset still a brilliant place to come and visit, but minimises those impacts so that we can support business? And then the follow-on to that, because it's all kind of related, we've rightly, within this report, and thank you for the clerk from Weymouth for coming along this morning, focused on the seaside aspects. People think of Dorset and they quite regularly think of the Jurassic Coast and all that has to offer. Dorset has a lot more to offer within its rural setting, and I think one of the learning points was acknowledged was better communication out into rural areas. How do we help? How can we work to manage the tourist experience when they arrive, find that the coast is possibly saturated with tourists, and then we manage that tourist resource back out into the rural areas so we can support business there and therefore hopefully create a more positive customer experience to tourists, as well as spread some of the business opportunities around.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Mr Duggan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Really good point. Yes, the focus of the operations plan is to mitigate some of the adverse implications of excess visitor numbers, but it's also a very positive approach that's taken within the working group, within the summer demand group. And we have a strong comms presence that also links in with the wider Dorset area into BCP Council as well. So as a practical example, if Lulworth Cove and Lulworth is very busy and the roads are getting blocked, then that warning and informing and those advisory messages that go out through all our comms and social media routes will be advising people of that and promoting suggestions of alternative locations. And I think that's something we can do even more of. So it's certainly something I'll take away from today and feed back into the operations group. the importance of visitors to the local economy is really recognised. And whilst this work is about protecting residents of Dorset, it's also about helping visitors to Dorset have a great time. So they go away with a really good impression of Dorset and come back. And it's achieving that balance. And I think the COVID experience, again, if you can look for any positives out of the COVID situation, I think it has helped us work together with partners and to work more consistently and promote the great benefits that we've got in Dorset better.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much. And I think the key word there is balance, isn't it? It's about balancing all of these competing factors. I just have a quick question on a specific issue that I see becoming a problem over the summer, and that's the bridge replacements in Ringwood. Now, I know it's just outside of our border, but the impacts, I think, are likely to have impacts in our local area. How do we envisage that affecting how people access Dorset and the possible ramifications that may have onto other non-arterial roads within Dorset? I'm particularly thinking in relation to my ward with the A354, and then what will happen when the Great Dorset Steam Fair arrives and we see 100,000 people trying to descend onto that second arterial road. This is a very major piece of roadworks, and the capacity on that road is reduced. I'm sure that as part of our day-to-day operations, we manage our own roadworks around the tourist season so that it minimises that impact. But obviously, Highways England are there for over 12 months doing that bridge replacement.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I am mindful that on the continent they seem to do bridge replacements overnight, but I don't think we're quite up to spec in this country on that yet. So, Mr. Duggan.
Thank you. Again, a very good question. Highways are a key feature of the Summer Demand Group, and I know that they work strategically with BCP Council and also with Highways England as well. So I feel assured that these issues will have been taken into account. And what I will do is take it away from today's meeting and ensure that a more detailed response is given. But highways and the management of vehicular traffic in and out of Dorset is a key focus of the work.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Just on that point, Mr. Duggan, at page 13 at 4.2, you talk about a contingency sum will be set aside to assist with any unplanned urgent items of spend, which I think some of that surrounds what Councillor Brown was getting to and alluding to. Do we have an idea of what that contingency funding will be, how much that will be, or is that still figures that are being worked up at the moment?
The contingency funding will be a set aside sum from the budget allocation. And at the moment, the budget allocation is sitting at around about £680,000, and I anticipate a contingency within that of around about £100,000.
Councillor Shortell.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I was reading recently about the reduction in the amount of traveller information centres that's being provided by the county at tourist sites. I know Graham did mention that, in fact, that they're also going to use volunteers to greet people from coaches and off the cruise ships to actually guide them and advise tourists exactly what facilities are available. With the absence of the TIFs and the introduction of perhaps volunteers, are they knowledgeable enough, or are they well trained? Have they been well informed in order to give the correct advice to tourists as they alight from their vehicles? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I can only speak for Weymouth, but the volunteers in Weymouth receive a set training package and are armed with many, many leaflets with which to assist visitors. Within Weymouth, we haven't had a tourist information centre for some years now. However, this year, we, as a town council, were very pleased to support the Weymouth Area Development Trust, working with several other partners, including Dorset Council, to provide the Weymouth Information Shop. This is a 6-month project in the High Street, so right where people will go, that people will be able to access information, not only as visitors on what is in the area, what is available to do, but also local residents will be signposted to assistance they may need as well. So we're very excited about that project, and I'm off at 12 o'clock today to the official opening of it in Weymouth Town Centre, and we very much hope that that will grow into a much larger, longer-term project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Biscombe. You said for against, Councillor Shortell. Yes, thank you. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on Councillor Brown's point about traffic heading towards the Great Dorset Steam Fair. The 354 is one thing, but the Steam Fair attracts an awful lot of very large, very heavy, very slow-moving traction engines, steam engines, which tend to go through some of the villages on the windy, narrow roads in order to get there, with queues trailing behind them for quite some distance. We need to encourage those traction engines perhaps to pull over at regular intervals and just let the queue squeeze past, if that's possible. Now, is that something we can actually try and help organise, either by passing information to them or requesting them, or by having the odd patrol that will just wave them over when necessary? But it does present a problem to an awful lot of local residents in Old Holt, in Cranbourne, and in through into Hampshire, of course, through Fordingbridge. So I'm just wondering, what can we do to help with that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate the point. There is a separate safety advisory group that is now up and running for the Great Dorset Steam Fair, and I will ensure that that issue is fed back to the group. And I'm sure that they are in contact and in liaison with the principal exhibitors, and it sounds like a sensible message that we could pass out. Part of the difficulty may be finding those lay-in places where these big vehicles can pull over, but I think it's a good message and one that we should be promoting. So I'll make sure it gets back to the safety advisory group, which includes highways.
Thank you. I was just wondering if on the back of what you just said, it's possible to put some little signs at appropriate places as a tractor pull in, let queues pass, and just put a few signs up in various laybys that will help encourage them to do just that. But thank you for the response.
Thank you, Councillor Took. I've got several questions myself. On page 12, 3.2, the multi-agency command centre MAC will operate by will be operated by a contractor remotely. Could we have an explanation around that? I'm not sure I quite understand the contractor that we're going to be employing. It's an outside body, I take it. It's within your table. It's £34,000 costing to it. Are we not doing that in-house?
Thank you, Chair. It's a specialised role for communications, and we don't, at this point in time, have that facility in-house, although some work is taking place about our out-of-hours and call handling arrangements at the moment. So it may be something that consideration can be given to in the future. But the company who we're using is a specialist contractor who are available to manage communications over a 24-hour period and issue warnings and informing alerts 24 hours as well. So it is a specialist role and not one that we can currently accommodate at the council.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to go to page 12 at 4.1, which is the table, and it's the intended spend on additional services needed seem to be very Weymouth-centric. My apologies to the town clerk who's in the chamber at the moment, but it does appear to be very Weymouth-centric. And I think what's come out in the conversation is as a recognition of that within the officer corps. And so do I assume that going forward in terms of planning, there will be more spend and more engagement with those towns, some of the coastal towns as well, it would appear that Swanage and Lyme Regis don't appear in this, but say places such as Wareham and Dorchester, Wimborne, Blandford, Sherborne and Shaftesbury. I think I've covered everybody's places that's in of historical market towns that are in the chamber, I think. Would we be seeing more of an officer focus on those and some of the spend in those areas for tourism as well?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the focus is towards the coastal town councils. Looking at the table there, some additional items have now come in since the report was written, and that though they include some work going on away from the coastline, and also work with Forestry England as well for heathland areas and the forests. So there will be the spend will even out further, but there will still be a focus on the town council simply because of the numbers of visitors who come down to the beaches. But some of the issues around ASB patrols, they are mobile ASB patrols, and last year we were sending them out in conjunction with Dorset Police to other towns where there were high visitor numbers. So it's about building in those flexible resources. For a high proportion of the time they will be based in the coastal town councils, but they will move to other areas as well.
Thank you. Councillor Lacey-Clark, did you wish to make a comment?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm lucky enough to be the lead member working on this project. And I just want to make it clear that in previous years, we have had quite a very good offer for other town councils that could have applied for and actually hooked into our services. And a lot of them did do so. However, where we allocate the money and where we try to allocate most of the resource is based on risk assessments that are completed with our partners and in particular the police. And as much as we will be helping and aiding all town councils, the reality is that the particular coastal towns, and in particular Weymouth, is where we see the highest risk levels. And so that is where the predominant amount of the resource will be going, but it is based on risk assessments and a lot of police evidence.
Thank you, Lacey Clark. I appreciate that input. Thank you. Councillor Canning.
Thank you. While we're being Weymouth-centric, which I think is quite an understandable position, obviously a large budget is being allocated to the Weymouth Park and Ride. And we obviously want to make sure that that's a big success. And to be honest, if it doesn't work with the large number of visitors we have now, it's not going to work if we get quieter things in the future. But I do wonder if one of the issues is whether we're getting real value for money by investing in a dedicated bus service when they actually have the number 10 bus, which goes between Dorchester and Weymouth, runs just at the end of the road from the Park and Ride about every 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the time the day and the year and the rest of it, whether we'd be better off investing in improvements on that route rather than having a separate route for the Park and Ride. I just wonder if anyone looked into that and cost-wise and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. It's not something that I'm specifically aware of. I will take that question away from today and ensure that you are responded to on that issue. I think the Park and Ride was suggested as a key focus for this year to help reduce the vehicle numbers going into the town, and I'm sure that the project will be closely monitored and will be reported on in terms of its success or not, and how busy the Park and Ride area is during the summer months. I know there's a lot of work being done in terms of communications to make sure that that facility is used.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan. Councillor Bryan, do you wish to make an input at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the voice. As you're probably aware, I've unfortunately got COVID, so hence the reason I'm not at the meeting. But thank you for letting me come in. The park and ride is something that I have been dealing with very recently. We're still in discussions with the bus companies as to which bus service to use. So I take on Councillor Canning's comments, and we'll make sure we discuss that with the relevant bus companies that are bidding to provide this service. It's a very important part of trying to make sure we keep as much traffic out of Weymouth that we possibly can. So it's something that we're going to be running, and we're due to open fairly soon. I'm still waiting for the starting date, but as soon as I've got that, I will inform all members as to what's happening. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. And if there's any consolation, you look far healthier than I did when I had COVID. Councillor Roberts.
It's only a minor point when we're talking about being Weymouth-centric, but the assistance at the harbours does cover all 3 harbours, and all 3 have assistance. So we can say that Lyme and Bridport are included in that. Just a point.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. If I could just move to page 13 of 4.3, and it's a point that was made earlier, I think, by you, Mr. Duggan, about the Wareham forest fires and how we're going to have to look after our heathlands. And obviously, I think it's obvious to everyone that we've had significant fires just recently in our partner authority in Dorset. Camford Heath has received 2 significant fires in recent weeks, quite tragically. So I was just wondering what the take-up of willing retailers who are banning the stocking of disposable barbecues, and how is Dorset Council promoting this? And can Dorset Council do more? And that partnership working with those retailers and get the message across over to the public as well. I think it's a very significant, important point. If we have those fires on the heathlands, and we were built on 70% of Dorset heathlands over the decades, over the last century, and they are such a precious environmental area.
Thank you, Chair. I saw the list of retailers who had agreed not to retail disposable barbecues about 2 weeks ago, and I was quite surprised at the number of retailers and larger retailers who were listed as well. So I think officers have had some considerable success with persuading, negotiating with retailers. I don't have the list with me today, but it's something that certainly we can provide. And I know our communications officers are publicising this as well, because it sets a good example if the larger retailers are agreeing not to sell them. So it's about a little bit of nudging behaviour of retailers to cease selling them. But certainly there are more listed than I thought there would be. So I think we're going in the right direction.
Okay, that's pleasing to hear, and it seems very important. I'm pleased that the comms team have got a finger on that, and they're getting that message out there as well. And I think possibly to look at as well, Dorset Council, whether we can get that message out further to our public as well, and really keep the pressure upon that. Councillor Lacey Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. So can I just add as well, in previous years, where we have banned disposable barbecues, we have actually had some people on site that have been removing them from members of the public and letting them know they are not allowed to bring those onto site. And we've done quite an extensive piece of work in communicating that with our partners as well, and they are thoroughly on board with it. So that is something we've been actively working on for a couple of years now, and it's hopefully going to really start this year to show its progress in kind of changing that behaviour, that they are not appropriate to bring when you're coming into the beach or to a heathland or to a forest.
Thank you, Councillor Lacey Clark. Okay, Mr. Duggan. I just wanted to ask, and it's probably the stupid question of the morning, and that's the 2 years experience we will have had about controlling visitor numbers into Dorset and the tourism, which obviously due to the pandemic. We presumably in the background, we're developing a blueprint, a model as to how we're going to be doing this in the future. and working with our town and parish councils as well. And having done all that work, it would be a shame for it to have been wasted and for us to forget it. I know this happens on occasion. Can I just have an assurance that we are formulating that blueprint so that we will literally be able to take it off of the shelf and we know what we're doing? I appreciate over a period of time it would need adjusting, it would need tweaking, but I take it that work is going on.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really good question. I think it would be a very big own goal if we don't take away the lessons that we've learned over the past couple of years and build on the relationships and the partnership working that's taken place. So after this summer season, the officers who've been principally involved will be drawing that together so that we've got a blueprint, as you put it, a framework, a structure to work off in future years.
Thank you. And if I can just go to page 13 at 5.1, there's concern within the report about any future funding. It would appear that the funding is going to dry up from government. Is there a view from the officers of where they're going to get future funding from this from? Is it going to come from budgetary requirements within the council or from our reserves, or is it going to be other applications to be made? Sorry, Mr. Selgren.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd ask you if perhaps I could come in towards the end of the discussion just on a couple of summary points, but you've in fact asked one of the questions, you've asked the question about subjects I was going to raise with the committee, which is just that. In presenting the report and at section 4.1, you've got the amount which is close to £500,000 that's available for this year, and the committee have recognised that that's obviously a reduction in the amount available last year. And the reason for that, Chairman, as you and the committee know, is of course we've been fortunate enough to have government funding for the response during the COVID pandemic. That was only fixed term, and once this sum has been used, that will be the end of that resource. So, of course, this committee has oversight of the council's budget setting process. So, again, Chair, in response to your question, I think the answer would be that would be very appropriate for this committee to perhaps comment on that. A comment was made earlier in your discussion about doing a further review after the summer operation had been delivered this summer, so that you could review the ongoing assessment. Graham's given a very accurate response in that what we've tried to do and the way we're managing now this summer operation 2022 with a smaller budget that we had last year is much of that activity we've tried to bed back into the day-to-day activity of services and other partners. But I think the question that remains is there a funding gap that is left that still needs to be done, which is over and above that day operation and indeed the very much valued contribution of our partner organisations. If I may, Chairman, I think that might be a very legitimate question for this committee to pick up and take forward as part of the Council's budget setting process for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Thank you. If we could just move to page 15 at A3.3, the briefing of the summer operations. It wasn't quite in the detail that I would have liked, and I was just wondering, in terms of a wider set of stakeholders, would this be including the town and parish councils and bids and chamber of trade groups, among others? Is that the intention of what the officers will be doing?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is. It's partly been informed by the responses from the survey that was undertaken to stakeholders as well, where a number of responses indicated that some groups would have wanted to see some wider involvement. So we'll be using the results of the survey to inform that blueprint that we talked about a moment ago, and to take into account the stakeholders who can really add value to the work that we're doing.
Thank you. And part of the reason I asked the question is, in terms of resilience, which obviously has been an integral part of this, and how we've coped as Dorset and how various areas have coped, and we've heard from various members in that who have knowledge of where we had failings in the first year because we were inundated with the visit numbers that after a pandemic when the government lifted the travel bans and what have you. So it was very difficult, and there was a very short time frame to try and move in order to get the infrastructure in place that we could cope with the numbers that we were going to get. And so just wondering, do we have an understanding from our parish and town councils where they are with their resilience plans, and are they up to date? Because while Dorset Council will continually be maintaining and updating its own resilience plan, do we know where our town and parish councils are with this? I remember in 2015-16, I think it was 2016, in East Dorset, we started a process of work to look at resilience plans with town and parish councils, and then local government organisation come across, and I come around. I suspect that maybe that work wasn't completed by town and parish councils. I doubt it was completed by the principal authorities across the county. So I just wondered where we were with that now. Do we have an understanding of where those town and parish councils are with their resilience plans and how they can move those into operation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the COVID pandemic has really put a focus on resilience planning and business continuity planning. And I know that certainly the town councils that I've been involved with have been working as well to ensure that their resilience plans are in place. And the joint working that councils have done between each other has required that as well. So I do anticipate that town and parish councils are in a good position in terms of their plans, but it is something that we will take forward with our emergency planning colleagues to ensure that support can be given both ways in the planning process, and that there is a robust approach to that matter.
Thank you. Do you think this is something that Dorset Council could talk to DAPTC about, and we could ask DAPTC to do a survey through their member town and parish councils to get an understanding of where the various authorities are? Yeah. I
think that's a good suggestion, Chair. The DATPC is a known route for good communication, and that issue could certainly be raised through that forum. Thank you. If I could just move on to page 18 at C3, information sharing situation reports. Current position is outstanding. When will this piece of work be completed? As it's end of May now, and we are time critical. And also at D3.5 is outstanding, and we are not far away from festival dates in the Great Dorset Steam Fair, which has already been mentioned within this committee meeting, which is an attraction for those traveller groups. There are two pieces of work that, according to the table, still work to be done. And as I say, we're starting to get time critical now because we're at the end of May. Thank you, Chair. Certainly the Gypsy and Traveller Liaison piece of work is being progressed quickly, and we have a solution that is now being put in place. So that resource will be available throughout the late spring and summer period. In relation to the other out-of-hours work in the improvement plan there, I know my emergency planning colleagues have been working with those services that have out-of-hours services to make sure that we're taking all the learnings that we can there, and to ensure that there's a robust rota in place for the summer period. And there is a meeting to take place between out-of-hours officers from the various services, I think within the next few weeks, just to make sure that everything is in place and all the resources are available. So we're confident we'll have that work done. Thank you. So my final question is, which you will be pleased to hear, is on page 20, would you agree that 3/4 of the 20% saying they were not sufficiently involved as town and parish councils is disappointing? How will this be addressed in the future? It seems to be a picture in the statement at the end of the report. So I'm assuming that we would need to do some partnership working with the DAPTC to try and improve those communication routes. Yes, I agree. I'm certainly aware that there was communication over the past 2 years through DAPTC, but I think we need to look at ways of increasing that and how we engage specific town and parish councils when the need is there. Thank you, Mr. Duggan. Councillor Tugg.
Thank you, Chair. Very brief point. It would be very nice if this committee could get a report after the summer, so possibly October, November, to say how you've performed against the expectations in this report. So what I'd be looking for is information such as what red and amber trigger points were met, when they were met, how often they were met, why they were met, what our response was to them, and what the effect of that response was, so that we can then start noting down, understanding any areas where we might learn lessons, or either to improve or where we've gone over the top and perhaps spent more money than we should have done. But it'd be very good if we get a report back to this committee sometime after the summer season. Is that possible, Chair?
Mr. Duggan, it seems a very good suggestion to me. What sort of time frame would the officers need to be able to compile such a report?
Well, the summer period in relation to summer operations runs through to the end, mid to the end of September. I think realistically we'd be looking early in the new year. You had a report this January on the preceding year's activities, so it might be appropriate to have a report just to recap on the 2022 operations, and as the councillor suggested, look at some of the learning points, and we'd be happy to do that.
Councillor Took, you satisfied with that? I think it seems perfectly okay to me to have it come in January.
Yeah, I would welcome that. January, what I'd like is for it to be early enough in time so that we can make decisions that will then improve ready. And I'm not sure January is early enough, but I'll be guided by the officers. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I have any more questions from the committee? So if I've got no more questions, then we move into if there is a need for a debate. Does any member have anything to say at this point? No? Mr. Selgren, I think you summed up a few things that you'd like the committee to take forward. Could you just recap those, please?
Chairman, of course, and thank you very much for that opportunity. Can I just make one point of clarity? It's on Councillor Andrews' question about what we're sort of calling the out of hours. It's like misnomer, because I think in terms of summer operations, some of that call out is during the day. So as Graham said, both in the report and in the presentation of it, there is a mechanism which was in place last summer and will be again this, for town clerks to be part of that cascade process. I think the point's been well made by the committee around making sure that includes all of the town clerks where these issues may arise, and I think the response that been given, I hope, has reassured you on that point. The other one, and very modest, but Councillor Lacey Clark, of course, is in the chamber this morning and mentioned that he's taken a lead role in summer operations, and he had that last year, and certainly Graham and I would wish to acknowledge with thanks his support to us and the work that he did to make sure that there was very, very effective communications with members. One of the initiatives that we took at Councillor Lacey Clark's suggestion was the table that we use as officers that Graham referred to in his presentation of the report to track all of the major events taking place in Dorset. We shared with Councillor Lacey Clark and we reviewed those each week when we met, and we're intending to do similarly this year. What Councillor Lacey Clark kindly did was they made sure that information was made available to members, particularly in the context of their individual wards. I think through that mechanism, I hope we were able to communicate effectively with members throughout the summer operation. The other one is a current theme that you've come back to, I think very summarised in the comments that were made by Councillor Brown around the balance of what we affectionately call the blue and the green tourism economy of Dorset. I think we focused in a number of the points of discussion this morning around the honeypots, particularly of the coast locations, but also of many of the market towns. There's been discussion, in fact, Chris Loder, MP for West Dorset, arranged a visit by the Minister from DCMS last summer. Councillor Bryan and Councillor Ferrari, the latter responsible for economic development, were both part of that. One of the things that we talked at length with the Minister was, in the case of Dorset, the need for us to, with government support, making sure we get the right blend of ensuring that we're able to offer our visitors a wide range of experiences when they visit, and in particular to see the measures that we could reasonably take to ensure that perhaps we have, as Councillor Brown was suggesting, rather greater uptake and usage of the facilities in the more rural hinterland, the green part of the economy, and perhaps easing some of the pressure that we know we face, particularly in recent years on the coastal hotspots in particular. So I think there's useful work that could be done then, and Chairman, if you and the committee were minded, I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to make a recommendation that when the Council looks again at its economic development strategy, whilst that matter is reflected in the existing document, perhaps the experience of COVID has brought home, as Councillor Brown was suggesting, the extent to which making sure that we use the entire resources of Dorset that we have to support our visitor economy, and the point that he very powerfully made about the impact that this has on our economy and its prosperity might be something this committee would put forward as a recommendation to Cabinet in terms of their future discussions. And just the final one, Chairman, which you kindly allowed me to cover earlier, was the matter of the future budget, which I do think is something that this committee would probably want to make comment on, having had this discussion this morning and the debate that you had back in January. I think Councillor Took is quite right in that point that you might want to debate a little bit earlier in order to influence the budget. But of course, Chairman, that's your discretion.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Councillor Lacey-Clark, did you wish to make any comment at this point?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on there's been some concern about the Gypsy and Traveller Liaison cover, and I wanted to make that really abundantly clear to everybody that more resource has been secured and obtained to enhance the availability of time when that will be. So the cover will be there and there's more resiliency built into the team for that. And we've also got a new mechanism which allows parish councils to use our transit site in order for the police to be able to issue Section 62s, which is the normal way of moving illegal encampments on. And I wanted to make the committee very aware that we have got that well covered. It may not be updated just yet in the report because that's literally been kind of agreed and finalised this week.
Thank you, Lacey-Clark, for that input. So, members, does any member have anything else they wish to make a comment on at this debate stage? So I think we'll take on board the suggestions by the Director of Police, Mr. Selgren, if members are happy with that. So in terms of the recommendation, members, and if we could take them on block, it was to note the progress made in the actions contained in the Improvement Action Plan, which was produced as a result of experience of summer 2021, to review the proposals for managing the high visitor numbers for Dorset during summer 2022, and subject to the above, support the proposals as outlined. So I think those in conjunctions with those are the things that were highlighted by Mr. Selgren. Are the members happy to support those recommendations? Could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposer, please. Sorry, Councillor Roberts. A seconder, Councillor Andrews, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Move on to agenda item 10. Thank you, Mr. Duggan and Ms. Biscombe. Thank you so much. So if I move on to agenda item 10, Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. No, I'm not. I've got the wrong one. Beg your pardon. Agenda item 8, post-implementation review of alternative service delivery of tourist information centres in Dorchester, Sherborne and Wareham. And the recommendations the committee notes the information provided in this report. I have a presenting officer of Ms. Lisa Cotton, Head of Customer Services and Libraries and Archives. Over to you, Ms. Cotton.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning all. And may I also today introduce to you Steve Shield, sat behind me, our Town Clerk for Sherborne Town Council, who attends today to provide committee with a really welcomed update for the visitor services that are now available in Sherborne. Really pleased to provide committee today with an update of the activity that has taken place since closing the tourist information centres in Dorchester, Wareham and Sherborne. So following local government reorganisation, a planned review took place to consider the existing operating model for tourist information centres and what future alternative service delivery models might be considered. They are discretionary services for the council, and the review highlighted a disparity across Dorset, with many predecessor councils having already chosen alternative service delivery through town and parish councils or community managed arrangements with notably successful outcomes. Public consultation took place between October 2020 and February 21, and this established that the main reason communities gave for accessing tourist information centres were to find out information about the local area, to buy tickets or to buy retail goods. and this data mirrored the customer information held by our TICs when they were operational. The consultation tested alternative delivery models, and over 81% of the responses considered that our town and parish councils were best placed to deliver visitor services in the future, working alongside and being in the heart of those with local businesses and their communities. Therefore, the conclusion of Dorset Council following the review and consultation was to continue to consider to close the tourist information centres, and following receipt of proposals to us to provide one-off funding to the town and parish councils to develop their offer and deliver those services. Alongside the funding provided for the alternative service delivery, Dorset Council confirmed its commitment to promote Dorset as a destination and continues to develop the Visit Dorset brand to support the visitor economy and promote sustainable tourism as part of its economic growth strategy. In section 2 of my report, I've provided committee with a summary of those alternative services that are now delivered with our town councils. And today I'm delighted that, as I've said, we have Steve here to talk for Sherborne Town Council. And I will hand over to Steve once I've completed the report. All three town council services have taken a slightly different approach and developed their proposals and services according to the needs of their communities and visitor economy. A commonality, however, within the three proposals was a clear requirement to develop their digital service, which we have helped with, as well as ensure that there are local options where visitors or residents can access information easily. So over the last 12 months, all three town councils have continued to develop their proposals. However, we have noted that understandably there has been some continued impact from the pandemic and changes to some town council personnel. Therefore, throughout that transition, I have provided all town councils with Dorset Council's commitment to add in professional support where needed from myself or colleagues where required. We have expertise within Dorset Council that can support all three. In section 3 of my report, I provide an update on Dorset Council's customer and library services. And this is to provide assurance to committee of the council's ongoing commitment to providing a warm welcome at our libraries and our customer access points, as well as accessing services online or by calling Dorset Direct, our customer services team. Our libraries offer access to our online services across our network of 23 libraries and also our 8 community managed libraries. Whilst we always encourage our customers to access information and services online, we ensure support from our Dorset Council embedded digital champions and our volunteer champions, and of course support services where we can delivered over the phone and in person when more dedicated service assistance is needed. And throughout all of our interactions with local residents and visitors, we encourage everyone to use the excellent Visit Dorset service, which provides an interactive platform for places to visit in Dorset, the attractions, many attractions across the area, works with our businesses and shares all of the activities, which provides an equal opportunity for promotion and marketing for all of those businesses, attractions and services. Chairman, so as I wrap up my report, may I conclude that with our continued positive working relationship between ourselves and our town council colleagues, we are continuing to manage the smooth transition to local delivery and will build in any feedback from visitors and residents on where we can improve access to information together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Cotton, for a very good report and a good presentation. Thank you. I'm now going to move to Mr Steve Shield, who's the Town Clerk for Sherborne Town Council, to give us a brief talk about the Sherborne Town Council's visitor services activities. Welcome to the committee, Mr Shields. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, Ms Cotton, for your introduction and inviting me indeed for the committee meeting this morning. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to provide a brief overview of the tourism provision that's been put into place since the closure of the Tourist Information Centre in the town. Following the Dorset Council consultation on some tourist information centres and the subsequent closure in Sherborne, the Town Council discussed the future of tourism in the town at its meeting in March 2021, whereby it was agreed that a proposal would be submitted to Dorset Council for transitional tourism funding. The focus very much of this proposal was the request for funding associated with the creation of a new premium Sherborne Microsite, as well as funding for resources, IT, and software associated with ticket sales, as well as funding for a range of publicity. Sherborne itself is extremely popular with visitors and tourists and is home to the magnificent Sherborne Abbey, open all year round, welcoming visitors wishing to come and admire the beauty of the building, as well as offering guided tours. Visitors to the town can also observe an abundance of ancient and beautiful buildings, picturesque almshouses, and 2 castles, and with these many attractions making captivating visits. There are also many festivals and events which routinely take place, but have recently been hampered owing to the pandemic. It is a pleasure now to see some of these events now starting to take place and being promoted to a wider audience. It is pleasing to see the Sherborne Country Fair taking place just this coming weekend at the Sherborne Castle Estate. Sherborne has an active chamber of trade working alongside a range of independent shops, cafes, tea rooms and coffee shops centred around Cheap Street. The Town Council has supported local initiatives such as Fiverfest in the town, as well as allocating free parking days to support local events and initiatives. The Sherborne Area Tourism Forum drives all things tourism in the town and is once again having its meetings face-to-face, which is pleasing. Our last meeting just a few weeks ago was both inclusive in terms of those organisations that were represented and the positivity towards much of the work currently taking place. I'm pleased to report the forum now has an appointed independent chair to assist in taking the forum forward following a period of transition when I have been acting as their chair. Much of the transitional funding awarded by Dorset Council and managed by the Town Council has now been spent on the development of the new Sherborne Microsite under the Visit Dorset banner, mainly covering initial setup costs and some funds allocated to future maintenance of this site. This new mini website has only recently been published and is already proven to be extremely popular and well received from the feedback given thus far. The Sherborne Microsite contains a range of useful information and content which will assist in promoting and supporting local events taking place in the town. Huge thanks must be given to the Visit Dorset team who have produced tremendous support in finalising a range of extensive content for the site which will continue to be enhanced in the future. Businesses are now signing up to an initial short free trial, some of them already part of the wider Visit Dorset site. No doubt the site will continue to grow now and in the future years, and the Town Council are committed to its future success moving forward. The site will also regularly be reviewed by the Sherborne Area Forum members. The Sherborne Microsite and other tourism updates were discussed during our recent well-attended town annual public meeting. Many local community organisations and residents were in attendance to hear about the launch of this site and the other initiatives taking place. The town promotional video, which was also showcased during this meeting, has proven to be so much fun in the making for both the Town Council and those organisations and individuals who took part. The video itself showcases many aspects of the town and was produced specifically to promote the town to tourists and visitors and sits proudly on the front of the Town Council website for all to see. Please do take a look if you have the opportunity. The Town Council continue to develop good working relationships with many organisations across the town for the benefit of the wider local community and those visiting. Recent meetings have proven to be a good opportunity for a range of networking opportunities. The Town Council have just started to work with the accredited Blackmore Vale Community Rail Partnership to enhance the reach of Sherborne's tourism and to mutually aid the benefits of travelling to the area by train. This is a great idea, and to get visitors, this is an idea to get the Sherborne Visitors Guide into many of the stations along this particular rail network, and some potential funding opportunities from the CRP to assist with the production of additional leaflets in the future. The Town Council have recently adopted a telephone box from BT in Half Moon Street, which is situated directly opposite Sherborne Abbey. This telephone box itself will shortly be refurbished with shelving added to house a range of publicity and local information which will be accessible to tourists and visitors coming into the town. The Town Council will also be acting as a nominal adoptee for the telephone box located in Cheap Street, which is soon to become home to a new defibrillator managed day-to-day by the Chamber of Trade and Commerce, with funding support provided by a range of local organisations. Various publicity material has now been refreshed and will contain new maps which will be made available for the forthcoming tourism season. A range of leaflets are also available relating to walks and cycle routes. The Sherborne Visitor Guide, which is the most comprehensive guide specifically for the town, is now currently being refreshed and will include new updated information shortly. New visitor information stickers have also been printed and will be displayed in many shop windows, encouraging tourists and visitors to seek advice and information from those shops involved. New reusable publicity banners have also been purchased to assist with promoting future events in the town. The town is extremely grateful for the Dorset Volunteer Ambassador Scheme, which has proven to be extremely popular locally and has helped to make Sherborne thrive once again with some wonderful and hugely committed volunteers residing locally. Both Lenita and Jenny from the Volunteer Centre have provided fantastic support, along with a pop-up static information station, which is often situated in a prime position in front of Sherborne Abbey on the grass frontage. There's been so much positivity about this scheme, and it is lovely to see the volunteers already helping and assisting across the town at the beginning of this particular summer season. It would be fantastic to see this scheme continue in the future years. The Platinum Jubilee celebrations are now just around the corner, and the Town Council have been working in collaboration with the Chamber of Trade, the Independents and the Abbey 104 Radio to put together a range of celebrations for the town. The Town Council was extremely grateful to receive funding support via the Dorset Council Reopening the High Streets Fund, which has contributed towards bunting, large town planters, reusable publicity banners with vinyl stickers, and picnic benches, to name but a few, all of which to support these lifetime forthcoming celebrations. The Sherborne Abbey bells will be rung to signify the start of the celebrations next Thursday evening. The Sherborne Town Band and Bluegill will be forming a medley of music prior to the Sherborne beacon lighting at 9:45 p.m, along with many other beacons up and down the country. A circle of 7 trees will also be planted across a range of local primary school settings in the autumn, one for each decade of Her Majesty's reign. Sherborne Abbey will play host to a service in conjunction with Dorset Council on the Friday afternoon. The Saturday welcomes a range of street traders onto Cheap Street during the morning, with Pageant Gardens then playing host to live bands, various music and entertainment, food and drink during much of the afternoon and evening, with a red, white and blue theme optional for those coming along. The Town Council are in the initial phases of relocating our offices away from the Manor House to create a community hub based on the existing Digby Hall and Library site. It is proposed that this one-stop shop location will provide a range of information and publicity moving forward, and will no doubt help to make that site sustainable in the future. I'd like to thank Lisa Cotton and her team in Place Services for their help and support relating to the initial transitional tourism funding received for our wonderful town, and I hope to maintain our partnership working moving forward. Thank you once again to the committee to inviting me along this morning and for receiving my brief report.
Thank you, Mr. Shield. That was quite an advert for Sherborne. That was. I congratulate you on it. I should say at this point there are other market towns available in Dorset, but it is obviously that with the passion that both yourself and the Town Council and your newly fledgling delivery of a Tourist Information Centre, the passion that's behind that, and I think you've highlighted to us as we saw before with the previous agenda item we had, that just how important it is to drive that tourism into our rural communities as well, and internally in Dorset, not just in the coastal areas, because as I think you've recognised that towns have to have festivals, they have to have events going on to drive that local economy and to support their business retailers within the town. So thank you very much for the report. It's very enlightening. Thank you. So I'm now going to move members to any questions from non-committee members. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Matt Hall. I represent Sherborne and I am also a town councillor, but I will be speaking as a Dorset councillor. Chairman Committee, I welcomed this review as it gives us an important chance to examine how we look at a process that this council deals with services that it either can no longer provide or wants to work with others. It is of rather concern to me that as a council, when quite often the phrase this council must be more businesslike. That with the Jurassic Coast, such beautiful beaches, history and heritage in abundance, castles, monuments, a population of around 400,000. According to the Dorset AONB website, 12.6 million day trips every year to Dorset, 1.8 million staying in Dorset. That when it comes to the push, we appear to cut and run rather than trying to make the system work. And I think that should worry us, because we keep being told we have to be more businesslike, but we can't make a system work with millions of people coming here. And I think we need to learn from this as we move forward. I think it's very important, and I will not criticise Dorset Council because they did work, certainly with Sherborne Town Council. I can't speak for the others. But in this ever-changing climate of fiscal issues, policy changes, and changing priorities, we surely need to be looking at proper partnership working. The discussions with Sherborne Town Council did happen, but it was talking about a service that the Town Council had never run, never looked after, never dealt with, and had no idea about. So to try and move that in the state of a few months doesn't give the best ending. It is true to say that the microsite and the tourism forum are now moving forward in Sherborne. But without the success of the volunteer ambassador scheme, which is helped and run by Dorset Council, I would really be worried about the future of tourism in a town that is heavily reliant upon it. Even now, that ambassador scheme is heavily reliant on one person's organisational skills. That's not a recipe for success for the future. We need to be helping as a council to be promoting things like the ambassador scheme and getting it out there, getting it into people's homes through our newspaper that we put out and through our social media skills. Because we need those people. If we're not going to pay for a service that this county is heavily reliant upon, we don't have heavy industry, we don't have the big businesses, we have tourism. We need to make this work, and we need to do it in a cohesive manner, which, as I say, is working in partnership, not just with. There is a difference. What we also have to bear in mind is that there is definitely, in the case of Sherborne, some unknown consequences which are becoming apparent, and these really need to be addressed and brought forward. The Tourism Forum is a great success in our town, but it has been chaired for years by staff from the TIC. Now it's chaired with people who don't have that same level of knowledge and training. Dorset Council, in my opinion, needs to be helping to provide those chairs with that training, with that expertise, with that knowledge to help create the success that it needs and it should be. A recent issue that has come up in Sherborne, and as I say, I can't speak for the other towns, is we got a huge amount of leaflets going out. It's a credit again to the ambassador scheme, that the amount of leaflets which are going out. But when we asked who had the master copies, were they copyrighted? How do we change them? It took months to get the answer. So in a tourism county, when the season starts at Easter, to only just be getting the leaflets now, we're missing a trick. It's vitally important that this council deals with tourism properly. It's a whole scope of things. The previous agenda item raised a huge amount of issues and great work that this council is doing, but there is still opportunities for this council to do more. And I would like it to show commitment to the town councils that have recently taken on the TIC provision, but all town councils where a form of tourism centre is now in operation, that it is there to work with them in partnership, to help them provide the skills, to help them provide the training, to help them provide the information. Because we do have to admit, and all credit to every town council in this county, they work like stink to provide a good quality service, but they don't have the staff levels that we do. They don't have the councillors who have the training like we do. And it's an important gap that we need to fill. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, and through this committee and any further work, that this council seriously looks at going, yes, this is working, but there are problems that need to be addressed, and we need to show greater support to those town councils. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. And as you're aware, much of your concerns I support, and I concur with much of what you said. Thank you. Sorry, did the officer wish to answer any of the points that were made by Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Chairman. Council makes very powerful argument and case for this. We've got a new head of economic development starting in July, Nick Webster, joining us from Herefordshire. And one of the things that we have discussed, because we've been in conversation with already, one of the things we have discussed is the areas of focus for his work programme. I think fair to say, and Chairman, in our briefings to discuss the work of this committee, we have talked about the importance of tourism to the Dorset economy. And if this is an area of work that this committee would like to take forward, and perhaps some of the comments made by Councillor Hall this morning in relation to this particular matter, and indeed my earlier comments about promoting both the green, the rural part of the Dorset economy, the market town, as much as the coastal locations, I think would be a very helpful contribution to the wider policy debate on this. I made, under that earlier agenda item, a comment about needing to refresh the Council's economic development strategy. So again, I think that the contribution that Councillor Hall has made to the discussion this morning will help inform that wide debate, if that's something this committee would wish to do.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. As you're aware from conversations we've had, I am quite keen to do a wider piece of work on this. Thank you. So do I have any other non-committee member who wishes to speak on this item? No? Okay, so I'll move to questions from committee. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief one. Council's in the process of setting up family hubs. So we've just had a press release about that. These are to provide services to residents. I understand that they will be, I guess, focused on revs and bends and questions for residents rather than tourists. But it just strikes me that there's scope within that to offer some services to tourists so that we can direct them and help them as well as our residents. And I simply make this suggestion and wait for it to be shot down in flames. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Took. I'm working with our Children's Services colleagues on the family hubs proposals that are going forward, and also we have made many developments with our libraries and customer services where we've integrated some of our front desks and our help desks within libraries to provide those very services. So absolutely looking at how we provide better single one council front door advice and information services. And if visitors come through that door, as said in my report, we really are there to offer a warm welcome to anybody that comes through to help them find information, advice and what's available locally, as well as essential access to council services such as the ones that you've described. Family hubs are particularly concentrated on children's services, so looking at working with families and children in the area, but also absolutely linking in with all council services and how we provide that one front door approach.
You satisfied the answer, Councillor Took, or do you wish to come back?
Just to say thank you. I'm very pleased to hear the response, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to congratulate Sherborne and its town clerk for a great report and a very, I feel very, content is the wrong word, but I'm encouraged by how well that Sherborne are managing this. And Councillor Hall's request seems purely financial. And actually the towns are doing extremely well at managing the tourist information centres. Indeed, I know it's blue economy, the Mayor of Lyme Regis was, for the last 2 years, has been saying we want to have gates and just shut the town. We've got too many visitors. And I think we've spent an hour and a half talking about dealing with excess visitors. I don't think, as Councillor Brown said, we're in any doubt that Dorset is one of the most attractive places in the country to visit. And I'm struggling with some of Councillor Hall's requests, because I think everybody seems to be doing, and Sherborne is a classic example, doing a wonderful job. And they've transitioned wonderfully into that. And I feel the local influence is really important. So, well done, Sherborne.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. And I would agree, Sherborne does appear to be doing extremely well. However, I'm not sure we're getting the full picture across the whole of Dorset with all the towns and all the TICs, but we'll discuss that at a later date. Ms Cotton, did you wish to make any response?
I think, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. We have many examples of some really good best practice across a lot of our colleagues and partners and community partners that we can learn from and take back and share. So any feedback is always welcomed, and we will share as a collective.
Ms Shield, without wishing to put you on the spot, is there any comment you would like to make? As you're being praised so highly with your TIC in Sherborne?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone in the room for the positive comments. It's very well received, and as I say, we'll endeavour to continue as best we can to improve the tourism in our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just echo Mark's comments in relation to Sherborne, and thank the clerk for coming down. You've made a sale. I will come and visit. So you can go back and you can tell your councillors at the town council it was worth a morning out. In your opinion, how important is the local aspect in your marketing of the town and managing the customer experience, and that partnership working with yourself and other voluntary groups so that you can create a Sherborne brand? And has this new, with you having a greater role over the TIC, has that allowed you to achieve that more easily than when you had to work with the Dorset Council, Dorset-wide vision? Because John Selgrim very rightly pointed out that in our tourism marketing that the Dorset Council does, it can quite often seem like a bit of a blue and a green divide, and coming from the green section, it can feel, and I would really like to implore you, Chair, that we do get to review the Visit Dorset work, that divide is 90-10 and not necessarily in the Greens' favour. So that comment, if a question to the Sherborne Town Clerk, and just note the comment, if that's all right.
Mr Shield.
There's no doubt that the presence of the Tourist Information Centre, it's been, it was a huge blow in terms of the town itself. I think we're still in that transitional process and just coming out of the pandemic itself, really. And I think for myself, it's growing those relations across the town. It's growing the Sherborne area tourism forum moving forward. I mentioned just a few weeks back, there was a really inclusive, it felt like it was really well represented. There was lots of positivity about the initiatives that I've mentioned this morning, but I think it is very much work in progress. And I think, as Councillor Matt Hall alluded to, I think we would always welcome any additional support, from Dorset Council, and also the continued partnership working moving forward. I think the significance of us moving towards the one-stop shop is quite important. I think that's inclusive, and I think we would want Dorset Council on board in that process. I think I mentioned the sustainability. I think working with our libraries, the ability to provide that information and support for tourists coming into the town, really. And as I said earlier, it's refreshing to see that events are now coming on board. That premium Sherborne Microsite will continue to grow and improve. And that's going to be a real, highlight in terms of digital media, but there is more face-to-face work to be done on the ground. We've heard about the Dorset Volunteer Ambassador Scheme. Councillor Matt Hall right to very much highlight that's been a significant support at a very difficult time for the town, really. So we very much welcome that. But I think moving forward, we want to grow our partnership working and work alongside Dorset Council for the best interest of the town. Hopefully that kind of answers some of your observations.
Sorry, so is brand Sherborne, the Sherborne brand, more important in your eyes and your vision than the Dorset tourism brand? And if it is, has this new mechanism with greater local autonomy or greater localism, it's a technical term, isn't it? Has that allowed you to achieve that more easily, more cost effectively, or any other benefits, or has it actually been more difficult? Or do you not drive a distinction between the Sherborne brand and the Dorset Council brand? Sorry, the Dorset-wide tourism brand.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's still very much in the infancy, and I think we'll be really interested to see that how it plays out. Obviously, the best, we want the visitors coming in. We've introduced that publicity. It's felt very much that we were driving that. That the town promotional video that was very much as an advert for the town. For tourists and perhaps people that want to come and relocate, to Sherborne and Dorset wide, really. So from my point of view, yeah, we are working as best we can for the interest in, Insula in terms of the Sherborne itself. But I do see there will be opportunities moving forward to improve that. But we are where we are. We're very grateful for that transitional funding. I think within our business proposal, we were very clear of our priorities, and that was a digital priority. It was to support local events forthcoming in terms of ticket sales as best we can. I felt that community hub approach would be that one-stop shop to be able to, with the ability to sell tickets, promote events, and for people to come as a focus point, because losing the Tourist Information Centre was a focus point. I mentioned initiatives like the telephone box. It's just one small example of where publicity and literature would be made available in the future. I know there's other initiatives across the town. We would certainly be willing to work with the likes of Sherborne Abbey that have got some ideas in the future as well, really. So I think moving forward, it's the connections within the town. That's our focus, and we would welcome any support, as I say, from Dorset Council as well.
Thank you, Mr. Shield. Thank you. Councillor Canning.
It's one of to follow on from those remarks. I think this is why we need a bigger review into the whole picture. At the moment, we're just looking at the three that happen to have been changed in the most recent past, but we do need to look across the whole of the council area and see how it's working and how the changes have taken place fairly continuously for the last 10 years. The whole service has been evolving. And I think the very good questions about whether a town brand or a Dorset-wide brand the best solution is to be balanced between them and what's actually working on the ground and what's happening all around our area. So I very strongly support that we do have a real in-depth review of this whole matter, and we get to really understand what's going on, what it means for the future. I mean, certainly, I think from my Dorchester Town Council hat on, I think we're more committed than ever financially to supporting tourism and getting more visitors in. It's one of the strange things where probably to save a bit of money at Dorset Council is actually costing the parishes and towns a lot more money. It's all put together than the original scheme was. But the question for us has to be: is it working? Has it produced a system, even if it's very different from town to town, what's going on? Is it something that we actually are managing correctly, and is it working in terms of getting visitors in? And I think, a big review into all that would make a lot of sense.
Thank you. I don't think officers need to comment on that at the moment. I think we'll pick that up in the debate section. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Canning. Okay, I've got no questions from members at the moment. After a year of operation, do we know how many of the public have sought the use of the Dorchester and Sherborne TIC arrangements? Although I appreciate the impact of COVID will potentially not give a true reflection of the current situation, but do we have numbers that we can compare with previously to the new arrangements? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid at this time, we don't have that data available. So this will be the first season that those tourist information provisions locally will be managed. And we're certainly keeping in contact to see, you know, what that feedback is. With the different offers in place, there is a widespread access to that information. So, for example, in Dorchester, they're working with tourist information points and various different points across the town. So how they will be able to capture the amount of footfall coming into those venues, because they're not just tourist information points, they're parts of other businesses within the town centre. So that might be difficult to capture robustly across all three, but we can certainly ask for that general feedback as the season progresses. And as we move through this summer.
Thank you. I'm not surprised that we don't have the number information at present, but obviously it would give a good reflection as whether they're getting a message out as to whether the public are picking up where these tourist information points are. Thank you. If we move to the next question. At page 31, 2.5, Dorset Council has given assurance that all three town councils in the report will get continued support, including the Dorset tourism team. I just wonder what support is there being given to other towns and their TICs? Is it to the same level?
At this point, Chairman, I'm only able to comment on the support that I'm providing the three that I've been working with. That's been within my role and remit. I do have contacts within Dorset Council where I know that officers from Visit Dorset team do have that much wider conversation and partnership with other local partners. So I would be able to bring that back or be able to answer that question outside of committee for you.
I appreciate the question was slightly outside the scope of the report, but I think it is highlighting further and further the need for us to do a bigger piece of work on this and a deeper dive on tourist information centres across Dorset. Thank you. So I had a question which really I don't think you're going to be able to answer, because it was about whether we have any evidential proof that the public are actually finding these tourist information centres, but because we don't have the numbers, I'm assuming we don't have that info behind us at the moment.
Yes, Chairman, I agree we don't have the data, but we can give assurance that people walking through our doors as far as our libraries and phoning up our customer services centre for Dorset Direct is certainly being signposted appropriately.
Thank you. Just got a question around, because it's not contained within the report, and it may be that these centres have been in too short a period of actually delivering what they are to the public. But with these two new delivery models of tourism in Dorset and Sherborne, do we have any idea of the expenditure and income? And are they running at profit or are they running at loss? And does this compare with other access in the Dorset Council area? Are they able to at least wash their own face? I mean, do we have sufficient information at that level yet?
Sorry again, Chair, we don't have, we have not asked town councils for that information, but if that's something that committee feel is appropriate, then I will take away.
Thank you. And again, I just want to quickly briefly touch on something which again is slightly outside this report, but it's something to bear in mind, so I'll raise the issue now. And that is in terms of our tourist information centres in the Dorset area. Are they in line with the BCP area? Is there a joined up approach with partnership work and deliver a uniform tourism approach for the whole county of Dorset to attract maximum delivery of tourists to help drive the local economy? Mr. Selgren, that might be something you want to pick up on, or?
Specifically, Chairman, on BCP Council, there are tourist information centres in Poole and in Bournemouth. I'm not informed on Christchurch, but I do know there are TICs within Bournemouth and Poole that are run, one within the museum, one within Seafront Services at Bournemouth. But actually the joined up approach in terms of economic growth, I would pass over to Mr. Sullivan to answer that.
Thank you, Chairman. We work with the Dorset Tourism Association, so that's Pan Dorset. It's largely administered currently by the LEP, but in my concluding comments, I'll perhaps talk a little bit more about that later. So the Visit Dorset team does do that, and they do collaborate closely with their colleagues in the BCP Council area. So in a sense, both at the strategic level and as Lisa said, at the operational level, that coordination takes place. I think, if I may, Chairman, anticipate where I think you wish to take the line of questioning. Could more be done? Could we coordinate better and further and more deeply? I suspect the answer to that could be we could well do. But if you are minded to do that wider piece of work that we were talking about a little earlier, that might be a way of doing it, because as I say, there is existing activity. I think you might want to ask questions of those subject experts, such as the chairman of the Dorset Tourism Association, whether he feels that we go far enough in that coordination, indeed whether we could do more. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Yeah, and to pick it up on Councillor Hall's point, that with the sheer numbers that we've got coming into Dorset for tourism, and obviously the big pool is going to be Bournemouth and the Poole area, with a lot of the residential, with a lot of the capability of people staying over in the hotels and the guest houses and the B&Bs they've got there. And there needs to be that ability to draw some of that tourism into the Dorset area, particularly with the green tourism, rather than just Bournemouth and Poole retaining those visitor numbers into Dorset. So I do take Councillor Hall's point. I think we could be making a much better job of doing that joined up thinking, that joined up approach. And it would benefit BCP as well to a degree, because it would be offering that greater enjoyment value for tourism that are coming into Dorset if they were able to visit these other areas as well, just rather than the big conurbation area.
Chairman, again, I think that's a pertinent point. One of the significant questions that is always around in the tourism industry and with people who work in the field of economic development regeneration in relation to tourism is what's done at a regional and national level. Because obviously we draw tourists, as we've discussed this morning, certainly from a wider area than our own immediate hinterland. And indeed, there has been historically quite a lot of work done at national level around international tourism. Now, clearly, with COVID, that's been more limited. But if this is an area of questioning and examination that the committee would like to get into, there certainly are subject experts, such as the chairman of the DTA, I think, who would give you a very helpful insight into how all of that coordination in terms of promoting destinations, both nationally and internationally, fit with the local picture that you're examining this morning. Because there is a wider, kind of wider understanding, I think, that you'd appreciate to have if you want to pursue that. Because it's, in a sense, we can do a lot locally, but we are dependent on what is done more broadly, and there are arrangements in place. And again, I think those sort of have ebbed and flowed over the years, but to perhaps understand where Dorset fits into that wider and national and international tourism picture, you might find a helpful line of inquiry.
Councillor Bryan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just thought it would be worthwhile just updating you briefly on a conversation that took place at the LEP board meeting yesterday, which is the travel side of it. The railway company emphasised the fact that they've doubled the trains now travelling between Bournemouth and Weymouth, and were saying that they were hoping Dorset Council would play its part in encouraging people to travel from Bournemouth into Weymouth for a day's outing. And I think that's something that would be reasonable to explore. So I just thought I'd point out that conversations are going on as recently as yesterday on matters like that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Very much appreciated. Okay, have we got any other questions from members of the committee? No? Then if I can just move to the debate. I think, members, what's coming out of this report, looking at what has taken place with Dorchester and Sherborne, of course, we've yet to get Wareham up and off the ground, as I understand it. Obviously, there's some great things being done. We've had a fantastic advert about Sherborne from the town clerk this morning, which as I say, other market towns are available. And I think Obviously, with both of these towns, it would appear to be doing a really good job in terms of their tourism within their towns. I think there is going to be a need to look at a bigger picture across Dorset. I don't know how members feel about that. We don't have one model that the public are used to, so there's no conformity. There's different approaches being done in a different town. I think as a council authority, taking your point, Councillor Brown and Councillor Halls, and I think we all share it, that we need to be getting best bang from buck from the tourists, to be brutally honest about it. You know, we are dependent on tourism in this county. We don't have any heavy industry. And I do have a concern as to, because there's no one model that the public are comfortable with, that they're looking at different models in different towns as to whether we are actually getting that message across to the public and whether they're making the greatest use of it. So how do members feel about that? Has anybody got a comment? Councillor Duck?
I think you're quite right. I mean, Dorset is a big county. It's not as big as my native county, which is North Yorkshire, but it's still a big county. And it's a very pleasant county, and it's a very touristy county. And there is the blue and green and the divide, and we need to advertise, encourage people to visit the whole of the county rather than pockets here. So rather than visit Sherborne or visit Bournemouth or visit Knowlton Church, I recommend that, by the way. We need to get people visiting the whole county, and we need to have information available cross counties. So somebody might go into Sherborne and say, loved Sherborne, loved the Abbey. What else can I see? Where else is there in Dorset? I mean, we're driving around for a few days. What can we do? And we need to get all this information out there to people to help guide them as to where to go. So I agree very much with what you said.
Anybody else member wish to speak at this point? Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, I won't continue to advertise Sherborne because our town clerk's already done that. But I think it's important investment comes along with what you've just said, Councillor Took. And for years and years and years, the green part of the county has been restricted in the investment that's gone into it. A lot of investment gone along the south coast, Jurassic Coast, quite rightly too, because it's key tourist destinations. But we need to start thinking about the rest of the county, you know, the northwest and the northeast frontiers, as I call them out there. So we just need to think about that as far as tourism goes. But no, I'm satisfied with the report. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. So would members allow the Vice Chairman and myself to speak with officers to formulate how we're going to take that forward and what we're going to put into that report to come before this committee in future? Is that okay? Thank you. Okay. So the recommendation was to review the progress made in delivering the Dorset Council climate. No, it wasn't. The recommendation was that the committee notes the information provided in the report. That's the third time I've lost my place on this agenda. I'm losing my touch. So members are happy to note the report. Just a show of hands, be fine. Yeah, we're happy with that. Thank you. Ms Cotton, thank you ever so much for the report. Really good report. It's early days, I appreciate that. And we would be interested to know how Wareham are faring with their operation when they get that up and running. And Mr Shield, thank you so much for coming and for your valuable input as well. Thank you.
Sorry, just on when we progress this, can we make sure we include Visit Dorset as part of that further work, please?
Just might indulge me. So in terms of that summing up, I would be very pleased with you to scope that. And again, if I may, I think both you and I would welcome comments from members of the committee and others. Obviously, Councillor Farrar is sadly not with us this morning, but I certainly can reassure the committee that the matter of getting that appropriate balance between the blue and green economy is something that is very, very close to his heart. Indeed, when we met the Minister, both he and Councillor Bryan impressed upon the Minister how we need governmental assistance and support to do that. I think the other reason, if I may, that to discuss this topic would be particularly timely is, of course, I was referring to the LEP earlier. The members will know that the world of the LEP is changing. So LEPs are going to have a less significant role in the future. And under the Levelling Up programme, funding from central government for economic regeneration will come directly to councils. Before this meeting, I was in discussion with official civil servants this morning about the funding which could potentially come to Dorset Council under that. And of course, in many senses, that puts the resource much more in the hands of the members of this council to determine how you deploy that. And therefore, having clarity about your policy on how you want to develop the tourism economy, I think would be an important part of that. And if I may, Chairman, we should just for the record, if I may, just important to remember, of course, whereas the tourism economy is very, very important to Dorset, there are other things, of course, that do underpin the prosperity of our economy around things like advanced manufacturing, defence and security, agriculture and engineering. So it's around, I suspect, just making sure that we recognise tourism as one of the many sectors that we need to make sure we promote and develop for economic growth.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Yeah, it's a balancing act, isn't it? In your capable hands. Okay, members, I'm going to move to agenda item 9. Dorset Council Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy Progress Report Spring 2022. The recommendation is to review the progress made in delivering the Dorset Council Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan. And I have the officer to give the presenting officer, for the report is Anthony Littlechild. And thank you for your patience and forbearance, Mr. Littlechild.
Thank you very much. Just to introduce myself, so I'm Anthony Littlechild. I'm the Sustainability Team Manager. What I thought I'd do is the paper's quite sort of dense, was just to give a 5-10 minute slideshow. Gets everyone to raise their necks a bit. So without ado, I'll continue. Thank you. So just to introduce why we're here, the Scrutiny role was took on the role to review progress against the Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan, which was adopted by a full council in July 2021. The first report, which was the autumn report, came to this committee in November and focused on our carbon emissions figures and what progress had been made against that. And this report is the spring report, which focuses on progress against the actions and some next steps. Just as a very brief recap, the strategy is large and comprehensive. It contains 2 really key targets. Firstly, for Dorset Council to become carbon neutral by 2040, and secondly, for Dorset County area to become carbon neutral no later than 2050. And it includes about 40-odd objectives, 190 actions. It's a very large, complex sort of strategy and action plan covering about 9 different key topics, including things like buildings, economy, natural assets. So it's complex, it's cross-cutting, it's a long-term strategy, so it needs to be dynamic and be able to flex and grow as time goes on. And we need to maximise all the opportunities that there are to deliver the strategy. It's going to require a lot of resource across the whole county area. And we need to drive change, and we need to address the emergency and do that with some urgency. So in the spring report, the autumn report, just to recap, we presented how we were getting on in terms of our carbon emissions, both within the council operationally and across the wider county, and highlighted that we'd made some excellent progress, so that our footprint as a council had reduced by about 17% since the adoption of the strategy, down to about 25,000, 26,000 tonnes, ahead of our target. And in the county, we had reduced by about 6%. That was based on government statistics, down to about 1.6 million tonnes of carbon. Obviously, the COVID pandemic had an impact on our emissions, which we drew out in the report because of the ways that we worked and the ways we used our buildings. So that gave us an extra bonus, which we need to make sure that we build on and capture as we move forward. I just wanted to highlight some of the key things that have happened. This is only just a real snapshot. So the report itself picks out some of the key achievements, and attached to the report is an appendix which gives a more detailed section by section account of progress and next steps. Just to highlight a few, in terms of our own estate, one of the key focus areas is around decarbonising our own estate. We were successful in receiving 19 million from national funds to help to do that. Our highways and maintenance teams have been working very closely with partners to look at embodied energy and the way that we use materials, and have introduced a whole range of techniques, some of them nationally interesting, to look at using low carbon materials and also reduce the amount of waste. We've been doing things like strengthening electric vehicle infrastructure in our buildings and our sites to support the move to electric vehicles, and things like managing some of our greener assets like verges in ways which are beneficial for ecology. In terms of the county, again, this is just a few key points. Our waste team works very hard in terms of household waste, and we're now recognised as the third most successful unitary county in England, with a recycling rate of about 60%. Our low carbon Dorset project, which has drawn in about £8 million worth of European funding, has been supporting organisations to reduce their carbon footprint, and we've already supported about £5.6 million worth of low carbon projects across Dorset and across BCP. The Healthy Homes scheme, which has been running for some time, obviously supports vulnerable residents in terms of improving the quality of their homes in terms of energy efficiency and warmth. And more recently, in this year, the AONB team have been driving forward the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme, which is, again, in its first year, has already given out over £200,000 worth of support to about 40 different projects, many of which complement the delivery of the climate and ecological emergency strategy. The paper goes on to identify a number of observations and opportunities for the sort of future, and looking back a little bit. It notes that obviously the pandemic has had an influence in terms of what we've been able to do, and also in terms of our carbon footprint. It's actually potentially brought that down further than it might have come. But it's also taught us different ways of working and different ways of reducing our travel. The policy agenda has changed and is growing and changing in a positive way in terms of this topic since we declared a climate emergency. The UK now has its net zero strategy, which sets out some plans and strengthens the whole framework around energy and energy security. The Environment Act has a key role in terms of how we're addressing ecology, as well as other areas such as waste, resources and air quality. And the Agriculture Act has introduced a whole range of different schemes, including the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is encouraging more sustainable land use. We've also, so all of that is going to strengthen what we can deliver on the strategy, and also hopefully will lead to some more support from national government in terms of funding and resources to support that agenda, which we've highlighted before is going to be key in order to achieve the ambitions of the strategy. And additionally, I've highlighted that there are other constraints that we have to consider and work with other partners to resolve and identify and understand, one of which has been noted before, is potentially grid capacity across the county. So introducing new low carbon technologies will require greater use of the grid, and in some areas we already know that is potentially not strong enough in certain parts of the county, but we need to work with providers and regulators and understand and work together to strategically plan moving forward. Just on the side. So just to highlight some of the key next steps, the report then goes into outline a whole range of next steps and actions, particularly in the appendix. But we're now in a sort of key position to sort of strengthen our approach and in order to reduce our own emissions and influence the wider systems to tackle sort of Dorset emissions across the whole area. So we need to make sure that we strategically approach tackling the three interlinked areas of ecology, carbon and resilience to climate change. And we need to make sure that we've got a very clear strategic framework within which we and wider partners are working. We need to strengthen our own internal programme and programme management of our reducing our own emissions. And and we need to work more closely with partners to influence those wider systems, as I've mentioned, to tackle the Dorset's wider footprint. And we need to make sure that we're trying to secure as much money as we can into Dorset to support the whole agenda, which hopefully will come on the back of some of the policy commitments from government. We need to do more in terms of engagement and communications. I think that's been highlighted before. We can't do this on our own. We need to bring everybody with us on the journey. And we need to particularly develop our local nature recovery strategies, which is going to obviously be fundamental in terms of the way that we deliver on the ecological emergency. So that was it. That's just a quick run through summary of the paper and some of the key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Littleshard, for that report. Thank you. So I will now move to the portfolio holder, should he wish to say anything. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's put the mic in the right place. If it's possible, I'd like to reserve some of my comments until later on, when I've heard what members have to say. But also, I would like to add a couple of points, just so people know what's in the very near future happening. We're in the process at the moment. Last week I had a meeting with the highways team and with Matt Prosser, the chief exec, and Aidan, who's the 151 officer, and Hanson and some of the people that deliver our roads for us. And it was interesting that most of the things they were talking about was how to reduce carbon. So from the highways team, we're looking at every way we can. We're working on a project which is a joint project between Hanson, Shell, and ourselves on what they commonly refer to, and I'm looking for the name of it now. I should have got this better prepared. Sorry about this. It's a bio surface bonder. So that's something that we're working on, as I say, with Hanson and Shell. But a lot of the content at the meeting last week was about carbon reduction. I would also like to inform the committee that we now have an in-depth meeting with Southern Gas Network, who wish to discuss with us as a county the prospect of the supply of hydrogen through the gas network, which obviously, and this will be green hydrogen, and that meeting is happening fairly quickly, like within 2 weeks. I've been invited to go to one of the largest truck manufacturers overseas, which means I'll be going into Europe, subject to permission to go, to see their new hydrogen engines that they're launching for the heavy truck industry. So there's lots of things happening. I would like to refer to one of the slides that Anthony showed you, which was where it showed the sort of carbon emissions or the tonnages that we have to deal with. For Dorset County, 25,000. For the whole of the county, 1.6 million. It just shows just how much work there is to be done. And I'm sure that members will be pleased to hear that I met the other day with our new director, Stephen Ford, who is also online. And we agreed a programme going forward that will involve parish and town councils. So I just thought I'd give that update, but I would like to, if possible, Chairman, if necessary, come back and answer some of the questions that members may raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Appreciate that. And just while I'm taking the opportunity, did Mr. Stephen Ford wish to make any comment at this point? I appreciate he's new in post.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to. I am new in post, but I have had the opportunity to speak to lots of people who are working on this across the council, as well as a number of stakeholders as well, and I think it's been quite mind blowing, really, just to get that sense of how so many services and organisations are pulling in the same direction. There is a real commitment across Dorset to to start tackling these challenges as a across different systems. So I think there's, as Councillor Bryan has just said, there's a huge challenge in front of all of us. But I think that if any part of the UK is well positioned to try and accelerate this, then I think Dorset is very well positioned indeed. There are some significant challenges which Anthony did refer to around areas such as grid, but I think but being aware of those, forewarned is forearmed as well, and I think that making sure that we're making representations at the right level to government, while also understanding what it is we can achieve through our own actions, is going to be really important moving forward. So, but as you say, it is early days for me, but very much looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And my committee and myself look forward to working with you as well. Thank you. So, members, I will now move to any questions or comments from non-committee members. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Brian Heatley from Robwell and Wyke in Weymouth. I should start by welcoming Stephen Ford to us. It's great to have a senior officer coordinating and organising this subject, and I hope it's going to lead to more progress. There's a lot to recognise in this report that has been done that is good, not just the £19 million on our own buildings, the things on the highways, also our long-standing recycling record at 60%. I looked at that and I thought, well, what are the best people doing, the best counties? And the best I can find is 64%. So there's a little way to go, but we're not far off. And of course, recycling is one of those things which depends very much on your geography and so on and so forth. It's not something you can necessarily all achieve the same performance. Can I also recognise in particular the performance of Low Carbon Dorset, who've been doing this work for a very long time before it became particularly politically prominent, and have played a big part. And I also recognise the commitment and energy of Councillor Bryan and Councillor Lacey-Clark and all the officers involved. Now, I'm sure you can all feel a but coming, and it is going to come, but I don't want it to take anything away from all that. The but is coming. But what we're doing here today is reviewing progress in delivering the Dorset Council Climate and Ecological Emergency Strategy and Action Plan. Here's the action plan. It's about 9-10 pages like that, with 17, 20, something like that, items on each page, about 190 altogether. About half of them say immediate against them. Most of the rest say medium term, longer term, but there's about 100. Now, I think if we were seriously reviewing that action plan, we'd have an appendix to this paper which would say against that 100, well, did that one, getting on with that one, but I suspect that a lot of them would say no action so far, no funding. And I think it is important to recognise that and recognise the size of the funding problem. When you're assessing the overall progress with a programme like this, you've got to understand how much of it are we doing, how much of it are we frustrated in doing, and what is the biggest issue. I'm speculating it's the funding problem. I don't see anyone contradicting me vigorously, but I'd like to have seen a bit more exploration of that issue. I met a lot of friends outside this council building at last full council, and they tend to think it's all Dorset Council's fault when we're not doing things. I think it's in our own interests to be a bit more explicit about why it's happening. My other but is around context, and it was great in the last report to get that 17% figure, because the 17% figure on our own reductions in carbon for our own operations, that's a summative figure of all of what we're doing. It's in the context of where we're started, and it gives you a measure of progress towards where we're going. After all, if over 20 years we're trying to get down 100%, it's roughly 5% a year. If we've done 17% in 2, that's good. COVID probably helped us a bit, but COVID will have lasting benefits. So that is good management information. I want to see more of that and more things like that. I took Councillor Bryan to task at the last cabinet meeting over one of the isolated figures, the tonnes saved by low carbon Dorset. 1,400 tonnes about, sounds a lot. It's actually 0.1% of Dorset's emissions in a year, roughly. It's valuable, but you've got to keep going 1,000 years if that's going to get you where you're going. So we've always got to have the contexts in these figures, and we've got to get the management information better. I've been asking for management information on our climate programme ever since a cabinet meeting before the pandemic. It says in 15.1, I think, in this paper, that some key indicators are now in the official system. I looked at the dashboard last night, and all I could find were the indicators that have always been there. The one on recycling, the one on tonnes of waste, the amount of ground recovered. It is not yet integrated into the system, and it's about time it was. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. And you've touched on a point that I was going to query as well, and that about whether we should be having a RAG rating on how we're progressing through this, and whether that would be beneficial both to members to have a better understanding of where the team is on producing this climate emergency strategy and working through the process. And I would assume, Councillor Heatley, you'd welcome a RAG rating as well in terms of how we're progressing with that. Yeah. So, Mr. Littlejohn, did you want to comment on the comments made by Councillor Heatley?
Thank you. Thank you for the points raised. Thank you for the butt. Yes, if I could just pick up on the management information, KPIs and context. I agree with you, and it's something that we've recognised. We've been trying to develop that. There are some more KPIs than the ones you mentioned that are already built into the corporate performance management system. But some of them are similar to the carbon figures. They're sort of annual figures, so they don't get, unfortunately, reported on quarterly because we don't have that data at the moment. So one of the things we've recognised going forward is that we need to improve that programme management approach around that information, and part of that is being able to have a clearer sort of RAG rating of where we are in terms of progress against each of the actions and particular areas, and also trying to sort of refocus and look at, you know, what are the key priority things that we can realistically take forward within the resources that we have, and working with partners and others to sort of take forward. So that maybe partly answers both questions. In terms of the low carbon Dorset thing, I agree with you at scale, but in some ways that shows the huge scale of the challenge that's ahead of us, considering the amount of money that's being spent through low carbon Dorset. But I would also highlight that one of the great values of programmes like low carbon Dorset, although the direct impact on carbon might be small, it demonstrates and is hugely valuable in terms of encouraging others to take action. And that's one of the key challenges going forward, is how we build on those really good case studies and lessons learned through all those businesses of what they can save, just to make it more of a normal way of doing things rather than having to push them to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Littleshard. Councillor Heatley, are you satisfied with the answer? Thank you. Mr. Ford, I believe you wish to make a comment at this point.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. It was just to sort of build on what Anthony was saying, is that that Anthony and I and others have been looking at the way that we're pulling together the reporting for the to signify the progress of the programme overall. And one of the things that we want to do to try and make the progress of specific areas more overt is to be very clear on the specific focus areas for the operational programme or the 2040 target, to be very clear on what areas of activity and progress are more specifically working towards the 2050 Dorset-wide ambitions as well, and developing RAG systems as well, certainly for the 2040 element in terms of the operational programme, but also developing a measurable approach to the ecological element of the strategy as well, and that's linking in across to the government's ambition for 30% of land in positive management by 2030, and so that we start to have a very clear demarcation between operational progress for Dorset Council, wider contribution through that systems leadership to the 2050 ambitions, and then also being very clear on what activity is happening both by the council but also our partners on the ecological work that's being undertaken in a way that's measurable as well. So just to hopefully reassure the committee that is something that we are looking at, and very much look forward to working with you all on honing that into something that is you feel is appropriate to be able to look at how we're doing in terms of progress.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Councillor Bryan, I believe you should make a comment as well at this point.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to something. Thank you, Chairman, by the way. I'd like to go back to something that Councillor Heatley raised. In the strategy and action plan, we say there's 130 million cost for the just decarbonising the Dorset side of us. 19 million we've already gained from government. We have put 10 million of capital in there as well in the latest budget, although that is over a period of years. There's £750,000 of the capital, which will enable Stephen to formulate a very strong team going forward. So I just wanted to make sure that people realise that although the total figure that we estimated was 130 million, if you add 19 to 10 to 3/4, that's a substantial amount of money that has already been committed to this. And as required, when Stephen tells us what he needs to do, I shall harass people to make sure we get that budget to cover it. So I just wanted to put Councillor Heatley's mind at rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. And you should be aware that Aidan Dunn is smiling a lot in the chamber at the moment. Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to just really comment a little bit about where we talk about natural assets and our county farm estate. I sit on the Farms Liaison Committee. We recently met and appointed 3 new tenants. All of those had plans for the ELMS, that's the environmental land management schemes. All of them were looking at ways of farming less intensively, in particular with reduced fertiliser inputs. And so I think the future of our farming estate is it's very good to see 2 young entrants and 1 older one, but all working towards that similar lower carbon type of agriculture. And also, just a quick point, on the natural assets, you've got the Studland Eco Moorings in twice. I'm not sure we can count it twice. It would be nice to, but it may want just a little bit of revision there. And Chairman, if I may, also I sit on the Pensions Committee and it is mentioned in this, and we are doing a lot of work with our asset managers, Brunel, and I know the Vice Chairman will know about this, and we're looking at actively investing in companies that are producing far more carbon reduction than the more simplistic one of just withdrawing from fossil fuels. And we're finding that the investments in the companies we are investing in is producing a greater effect on reducing carbon than just simply pulling funds. Because our primary purpose, of course, is to make sure we have enough pensions to pay our 40-odd thousand pensioners. And we must never lose sight of those who've, in the whole, work for this local authority and for BCP and the fire and the police. And it's absolutely crucial that we achieve that balance. So I just wanted to make those points.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Canning.
Yeah, just to follow that up, Councillor Roberts is correct. I'm chairman of the Dorset Pensions Fund, and we are literally at the start of a major strategic review of our investments, which we do every 3 years. A big part of the debate we'll be having will be, secondly, how to maximise our impact on reducing carbon emissions and dealing with climate change. It clearly will be, as has been the case probably for the last 12 to 18 months, will tend to dominate a lot of the discussions that the committee has. But obviously our objective is to maintain performance from our investments while also making significant moves towards a far more environmentally sustainable position. And I'm confident that we will come up with something that we can all accept and work with that is very much in the right direction.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. Mr Littlechild, touching on what's been said, and particularly the point raised by Councillor Roberts, because we are an authority that owns so many farms, 54, is it off the top of my head? 42 was it? Sorry. 42 tenants. Then do I assume that we are actually trying to put ourselves in a position of being a leader on this in terms of the low carbon footprint our farms will be producing and nitrates and that type of thing?
I can answer some of that. Maybe John could back me up after. We've recognised, obviously, county farms as an opportunity in terms of the climate change agenda, and as you mentioned, that there's good work hopefully going to go forward. We've had some discussions with the liaison panel and done some work in trying to put together some best practice with some other partners. So there's definite opportunity there, and it would be great to see some of Dorset's county farms, if some aren't already, leading the way in terms of showing best practice. And I think some of the projects mentioned under the Protecting Future Landscapes is also already, farming landscapes already picking up some of the county farms and doing work with some of the other tenants on sort of sustainable farm management practices.
Mrs Selgren? Right, okay, thank you. Councillor Alford, did you wish to make a comment?
Fantastic. The name's Anthony Alford from Egerton Ward. And I have 3 questions. I'll give them all together because thematically they're the bigger picture. But at the same time, I'm also interested in what happens in year 1, i.e. the year we're in now. So first of all, I'd like to welcome the appointment of the new corporate director. And the first question I have is whether all those who work on combating the emergency are structured together as one team within the council's organisation chart. The second question is that we mentioned significant amounts of money, and there is the aspiration to have even more, and there's a large number of tasks. I just wonder whether a budget for this work, for this current financial year, has been established. And the third question I have is similar to the last one. It is whether the work of the team has been incorporated into the performance management framework. Now, I have a suspicion, in the light of an answer to an earlier question, that the answer is no, but we'll see.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Mr Selgren, do you wish to answer that?
Happy to, Chairman. And Councillor Bryan perhaps may want to bid on the budget item, but to answer Councillor Alford's questions in turn. On the matter of the team, so Stephen has a team around him, a direct team. In fact, we're just looking to carry out a small restructure on that to make sure that we've got the correct resource in place to support Stephen to deliver that. The approach the Council has taken, not untypically for cross-cutting work of this type, and again, Chairman, this is reflected when we had this discussion in the budget debate in the autumn, is that what Stephen is doing is leading cross-cutting teams across the entire council. So this is colleagues not only from the Place Directorate, but also in Children's and Adults, because clearly, for example, in relation to premises, both the Children's and Adults Directorates operate significant premises, and indeed in things like curriculum, it's the Children's Services Department that can make a greater contribution to that. So that reason, my response to Councillor Alford's question is that Stephen has a team around him, but actually the majority of the staffing, Dorset Council officer staffing that he is directing are within other parts of other directorates, including the Place Directorate, in fairness. On the matter of budget, so the Council... Sorry, Chairman, you're going to... Sorry, I thought you wanted to cross-question. On the matter of the budget, so in the budget was set for the current financial year, both a revenue and capital allocation were made to support this work. And say, Councillor Bryan or Mr Dunn may wish to say further about that. So there is provision in the Council's budget to support this area of work. On the matter of performance management, I think fair to reflect the earlier comments, that's work in progress. So the team, which is part of Aidan's Directorate on business performance, we'll be looking to add those indicators in and build that as we develop the strategy and statutory response.
Thank you, Mr Selgren. You satisfied with that answer, Councillor Alford? Thank you. Mr Dunn, do you wish to come in at this point?
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit from the finance perspective as well. So I'm Aidan Dunn, I'm the Executive Director for Corporate Development and the Accountable Officer for the Council's finances. First of all, I'd like to endorse what John has just said, in the sense that the climate and ecological emergency is a council priority, therefore it's all our priorities. So my team, as much as they deal with the finance, HR, ICT, or all that side of things, it's part of their duty and responsibility as members of this, employees of this council, to do their bit for the ecological emergency. So in that sense, we're part of the team that's supporting Anthony and Stephen and the rest of the council in achieving or trying to achieve those objectives. I want to just comment on budget matters, if I can, just to pull out a couple of themes from the report, if I may. First of all, a recognition that not all climate activity costs, or responding to climate change activity, costs money. And Councillor Bryan mentioned at the beginning of his introductory remarks about the trip we'd had last week to look at the highways team in Gillingham. And there was a very simple example there of how the team there were using or reusing recyclates off the road. So road chippings were being reused when laying pavements. It's very, very simple. It seems very, very obvious. But previously, those chippings were kind of buried in the ground and new chippings brought in. So it's a simple way of sort of reducing our carbon impact, and it's more cost effective. Secondly, some of the climate action does cost money, eye-watering amounts, as we heard earlier. And our response to that is to try and secure funding externally, so government funding. And I'd like to come back to that point a bit later, if I may. But thirdly, from an organisation's perspective, there is a real invest-to-save opportunity here. Simple example is street lighting. If we can get more energy-efficient street lighting, it costs capital to invest in that street lighting, but it makes revenue savings. So climate benefit, but also a revenue saving in the future. And Councillor Gary Sattle has been very clear that there is a real appetite for invest to save from across the organisation, be it on our priorities of adult care, children's services, or indeed climate response. So whilst there's a real challenge of the budget around here, we do need to secure external funding as well. There's sort of an appetite for internal investment and opportunities as well for us to be more efficient from both financial and a carbon perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Just before I bring you in, Councillor Brown, because this has touched on a question that I've got, and in terms of the officer resource that's needed within delivering this ecological climate emergency project, could I just ask, slightly separate to it, although it is part of it, and this is my concerns around the grant funding, which I'll come to you in a minute, Mr. Dunn, over this. So we know from the past that when these grant applications come forward, they're a very, very short time frame, and this council authority has to move at pace to achieve putting a bid in for those grant applications from central government. Now, we've been, I think, quite successful in the past. We've had some substantial pots of money that have come from government because we've got an office team that have been able to progress that work at pace. And my concerns at the moment are, due to those short timeframes associated with the grant applications, and knowing that the officer corps is stretched in many departments, and the need for that work to be done over different directorates, can you give this committee assurance that there is sufficient depth and resilience within the officer corps to deliver that work that is needed in preparation for the grant applications to ensure we are in, as you say in a report, an opportunity-ready position? So I appreciate that we need an officer corps to be doing the work of the ecological climate strategy, but have we also got that officer support sufficiently within depth to achieve those grant applications? And just second to that is there an additional funding resource within the authority that can be called upon from the Section 1051 officer should it be needed at short notice? In other words, to bring in additional officer resource, and particularly those which I think Brian Heatley has alluded to in the past, that you have those people that are with absolute expertise in certain fields that will be outside of this council authority. Mr. Selgren?
Chairman, if I can come in first, I'm sure my colleague Mr. Dunn will want to come in afterwards. I'm very pleased I can put my hand on my heart, literally, and say that, look you and the committee squarely in the eye and say the answer to that around the officer resources, yes. I'm very grateful to Aidan and his team that they have put in place very comprehensive arrangements to ensure that the council has the ability to prioritise the resource to support funding bids of all kinds. And we've received a report on that this Tuesday and have agreed that at the senior leadership team. So that is definitely in place. What I'd observe in relation to bidding, and that's why I'm grateful to the work that Aidan and his team have done, because it recognises that you need a certain level of expertise coming from within the service itself. So we look to colleagues like Anthony as the subject experts when putting a bid together, and I've got exactly the same going on in areas like economic development. But equally well, we need those more generic, generalist expertise that colleagues like Aidan and his corporate team will bring to bear on that. So I think in the very best way now, we've got the best balance between subject matter experts who will support bid writing, complemented by additional corporate resources in exactly the way that you described, Chairman. So it's for that reason I can answer that question with confidence, but you may wish to invite Mr. Dunn perhaps to say a little bit more about what he has put in place.
Mr. Dunn, before I bring you in, I just need to suspend standing orders because we're reaching the 3-hour mark. So a member's happy to continue with the meeting if we suspend standing orders. Is anybody in need of a comfort break? Because I appreciate we've been nearly three hours in. Okay, so if I take a 5-minute, 10-minute, 5-minute comfort break. Yeah. So could I have a proposer to suspend standing orders? Thank you, Councillor Andrews. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Brown. All in favour? Thank you, members. I'll suspend the meeting for 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you, members and officers, and members of the public. We reconvene the meeting at 1:07. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you. So the question was, have we got sufficient resource or flexibility within our budgets to be able to buy in expertise when needed to support grant applications? So the answer is yes. We have got flexibility within our budgets. We hold a contingency for such actions. I'd just like to caveat that with a couple of comments. First of all, a quick reflection of what John was saying earlier. We've set up a corporate team that sort of gathers from across the organisation bids that are being made, be they in adults, children's or place directorate. The successful ones and the unsuccessful ones, so that we can share learning, share best practice to try and increase our chance and success. My other reflection is that we do have to be careful of what we bid for. Sometimes we can get a little bit carried away sort of chasing the funding, and if it doesn't align with our corporate response priorities, then there's a real risk that we can get sort of distracted and end up chasing the wrong thing. So we do have to be cautious about what we bid for, but when we know it's the right thing to bid for, we've got flexibility within our resource pool to be able to buy in expertise. So that quite often would be external consultants, and our procurement team is set up to be really flexible and agile, because these are rare resources that every other council in the country will be chasing as well. So I think we're very well placed for that. And as Anthony says in his report at paragraph 2.3, we need to be opportunity ready, and I think we're very much in that space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. And I'm pleased to say we've got a proven track record of that so far, haven't we? Which has been really pleasing to hear. Thank you. So sorry, Mr. Littlechild, did you wish to add anything to all of that? Or no, you're fine. Okay, so I'm going to move to Councillor Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of flicking through the report, one of the observations I wanted to encourage was that when we are looking at projects to deliver the action points, that we try and what I would call two birds with one stone. So projects which both deliver on the environmental aspect, but also can help provide a social value and whatever that may be for our communities. And the reason I sort of want to sort of highlight and advocate for that is that will help get more people on board with the climate change agenda. We have seen in this very chamber that not everyone is on board with wanting to tackle climate change, probably to the same level as Dorset Council's ambition. And sort of picking up on the comments Mark was making earlier, our county farms estate is a great example of that. I represent the Cranbourne Chase ward, which is arguably one of the most rural and definitely has one of the highest levels of county farms. You know, these drive an income stream for the council that keeps Aidan happy, which is important. We always need to keep the money happy. You know, if they're well managed, they're a carbon sink. They allow for lower food miles. That's a massive thing. If we can eat local produce, you know, instead of shipping avocados from Peru, that's a lot better for the environment. You know, they're integral to our rural communities, and they provide employment in rural areas. So, you know, more projects that we can get two bits of value out of, the better. So that's just sort of something I wanted to advocate, Chair.
Mr. Littlechild, I guess that is part of the ethos of that, is to provide that community benefit, and as Councillor Brown says, to get buy-in from the public, because we're looking for a change of culture here.
Do you want me to? Yes, yes, most definitely. So if you just looked at some of the projects that were already mentioned, they've all got what we called in the strategy is sort of co-benefits. So they might be focused on doing one thing, but the benefits are others. So if you were to take Low Carbon Dorset as an example, it's helping businesses to reduce their carbon footprint, which is helping their profitability and their sales pitch in terms of green sales, but it's also helping the local economy, supporting local suppliers, sharing good practice, all those sorts of things. Healthy Homes Dorset is a partnership with public health for the purpose really of helping vulnerable people who are living in poor, cold homes suffering from health problems to be able to access money to insulate their homes, improve the quality of their homes. So you're right, it's a absolute fundamental really to the success of this thing is not just doing that, but building on all those key benefits. And perhaps we need to do more to draw some of those out to identify some of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I got Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. There is work that's been done very well. And I think Councillor Bryan and Mr Littlechild are to be congratulated on the work done so far. I think it's been excellent. I was a member of the Regional Climate and Ecological Emergency EAP, and that's resulted in some excellent work. It's important for us to go forward with this and to keep all of our partners and the public on board with it. And in this respect, I think perception of what we're doing is key. But I have concerns about that perception. It may be the elephant in the room, I don't know. Very recently, we called on government to expand all sources of energy, including fossil fuels, so oil drilling, fracking, etc., part of that mix. And that's, I believe, created a perception problem with both the public and with our partners. And I'd like to know how, or if it's possible, to counteract that and start to get people to remain with us on this journey, because it is a journey to get to carbon neutral. So how do we get rid of the sort of negative impression that sort of thing might cause? Thank you.
Do you wish to come out on that, Mr. Littlechild?
I can have a quick response. I don't know whether others want to jump in after. I mean, I think the key to this and bringing others with you is about the communications and engagement with wider partners, wider communities, and we recognise that there's definitely more that needs to be done there. We've got some really excellent examples through some of the projects that we're working on, but there's definitely more on the general ethos around climate change and the need to bring everyone along to sort of tackling that we need to sort of build on.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. There's an awful lot of work to do. I was wondering if there was some specific things that we might be able to do. And I appreciate you've had no notice of the question, so it might take a little bit of time to work out. But I think it's important that we do things to retain the confidence of the public and our partners in this. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Chair. In response to Councillor Took, I think it's fair to say that when we looked at this at full council, and he makes reference to the fact that it would appear that people have the impression that we were supporting the extraction of fossil fuels. It certainly wasn't the case. What we were trying to do was maintain a local source of them in the interim, whilst we find alternative articles to use. It's common knowledge that oil will always be needed in some way in all sorts of things. At the full council meeting, the leader, Councillor Flower, pointed out the content of a mobile phone and the amount of oil that is in there to produce it. This is all part of the bigger picture, but I think the idea that we should suddenly do away with all forms of fossil fuels is just not practical. We've got to find a way in which we can phase out the use, but where the use is non-carbon emission, doesn't create carbon emissions, those are the areas that we need to work with. And I can assure everybody that it isn't the intention to open up oil wells all round the councils there, or all round our coastline. Far from it. What we need to do is make sure that we do everything in a controlled format. and hopefully that will put Councillor Took's mind a little bit at rest. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Councillor Took, you're content with that answer?
I hear what Councillor Bryan says about intent, and I heard what Councillor Flowers said about the contents of a mobile phone. Sadly, we weren't able to discuss this at length in that council meeting for various reasons, which was a great shame. But if we're calling on government to increase fossil fuel extraction as well as and renewables, because that's surely part of it, that does create a perception problem. And my question was not, were we right to do this? What's done is done. But what's done has created a problem with perception of what this council's intentions are. And I'm very keen that we are able to take practical steps, real steps, that will allow us to, if I say reclaim the moral high ground, that might be putting it a bit high. But we need to do something. And I'm just asking for an opinion as to what it is we could practically and effectively do to prove our green credentials. And it's that simple. I'm not trying to place blame. I just want something to be done so that people in Dorset, our partners that we work with, are able to go along with us and feel confident that we're going in the right direction. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. And I don't think it's lost on any of us the perception of the public and how they view the council, and to ensure that we are doing the right thing and progressing with this climate emergency as we have been. But I take your point. Thank you. And they're going to move to Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Some of my points are already covered. I'm really glad that the performance dashboard is going to be, the environment is going to be part of the performance dashboard. My point, it makes to 12.2, the EV charging points, and I understand our points are not the fast chargers. And I know this is frustrating, or some of in the car parks, this is frustrating some of our residents. Am I correct in this, to say that these charging points we've got in some of the car parks, etc., are not fast chargers?
Mr. Littlechild, are you able to answer that? Do you have the technical detail in front of you?
From my understanding, I can go and get you more details. I believe we have a little bit of a mix in Dorset, and we're moving towards faster charging. I think that there's rapid charging and fast chargers. Of my understanding is the ones we're putting in are fast chargers, not necessarily the rapid sort of 30, 40-minute chargers, although they are looking at where to put some of those in some locations, I believe.
Councillor Andrews, did you have another point to make? Or did you want to come back on that one? Okay.
Yeah, so thanks very much. It's my lack of understanding of electric vehicles, because I haven't got one myself, so I haven't really researched it that much, but it's only talking to residents, but thanks very much for that, sir. My other question was, throughout the whole of the report, there's not much that throws us towards other renewable forms of energy, such as wind and tidal power. I just wonder what we're doing to research that, and what we're doing to encourage government to invest in those kind of technologies.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Yes, for the coastline that we've got, wave and tidal power would seem to be an avenue that we should be going down, as it were. Mr. Littlechild? I can bring in Mr. Selgren afterwards. Mr. Ford, he hasn't requested to speak, but certainly, Mr. Ford.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think looking at the generation in the round is going to be a big part of my role, working across with economic development colleagues, there are certainly, from what I've seen, there's potential to look at tidal technologies, and to get at and looking at the development of hydrogen technologies, and I know this has been looked at before, but I know that that offshore wind has been looked at before. I don't know where that is, but there are a whole range of different technologies that I think in combination could quite rapidly accelerate the decarbonisation of the energy system in Dorset. I think the one thing just to bear in mind is that while I think there's huge opportunity, there are still some significant challenges in terms of the grid infrastructure for some of these technologies as well. So I think in terms of how the council positions itself, both with developers and government, around taking these technologies forward, has to be done hand in hand with working with the district network operators and Ofgem as well, about what needs to happen in terms of unlocking some of those significant infrastructure challenges as well. But certainly there's huge opportunity, I think, in Dorset to take forward a range of technologies with significant economic benefits as well as environmental.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Littlechild, did you wish to add to that?
Yes, just briefly, only just to add, I think in the report we highlighted that what the current sort of renewable installation was in across Dorset and BCP as well, I believe, but probably we didn't add enough context. So there has been a huge escalation, in particular in large-scale solar installations across the county, and that is sort of likely to sort of continue into the distance. Obviously, Stephen mentioned some other technologies have their own challenges and more difficult to deliver in Dorset within the landscape and other issues that we have. But that's not to say that there's plenty of opportunities to explore going forward.
Mr. Selgren.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to add to that, so Councillor Bryan, Councillor Ferrari and I have met a range of significant number actually, of sustainable energy providers who are working in Dorset or have an interest in working in Dorset. Those contacts which we now have during the course of the past fortnight, where Stephen's been with us, have been making those connections with him. So he's been picking up that, and indeed I've been monitoring some emails this morning where we're picking up meetings with those people. So all of those things are on an active footing, and clearly some of those things are a way off because there are planning and other considerations to go through. But I think in answer to Councillor Andrews' question, all of those things are being looked at. But if members feel there are others, or indeed are aware of contacts of their own that we can pursue, then we'd be very pleased to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts, did you wish to come in on this point?
I was just going to mention with some of the other connections that with the offshore wind, the issues we have with things like the World Heritage Site, and the fact that almost there are MCAs or marine conservation areas stretching almost along the entire coast of Dorset. It isn't quite as simple. And then we move into the busiest shipping lane in the country. If we go further out, it's not quite as easy off the coast of Dorset. And bringing power into any of the power lines in, and the structure to link to the national grid in those areas like the World Heritage Site are quite problematic.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Yes, I'm aware of it as well from the previous Natavitas Bay bid that was brought in, and UNESCO had quite a strong line on that. Yes, I do remember it. Thank you. Going back to Councillor Andrews, I believe you had another question.
No, it's just to come back on that one. Thank you very much for your answers. I think it's a huge opportunity for us in Dorset to bring not only those sustainable energies in and become the national leader in tidal power if we want to, and if we want to invest in it, but we'll create high-paid, technologically sound jobs for the very, very distant future. If we put ourselves up to be national leaders in these types of technologies. So I would encourage everything we can do to actually make them part of our strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Mr Selgren?
If I may, Chair, just add very briefly to Councillor Andrews' comment, that one of the parties that we've spoken to is the Crown Estate, of course, as members will know, are responsible ultimately for licensing those offshore-related sites. So we're actively engaged with them and are seeking to remind them that despite the known constraints that Councillor Roberts has referred to, where there are opportunities to look to exploit those where we can.
Thank you. Councillor Canning.
Yes, thank you. I thought I should mention, because nobody else has mentioned this, but yesterday there was a webinar presentation by the team on planning issues. And as part of that, there was a very good chart which dealt with renewable energy and how much it's grown over the last 10 years and broke it down by categories. And the huge growth in solar power was very, very, very impressive. And I wonder if something like that could go in future versions of this report, actually, when we come back. Because I think it does show the rate of progress that's been made across a whole range of renewable energies, and it's useful to see that sort of statistic. And if people hadn't gone into the webinar yesterday, they might not have seen it otherwise.
Thank you, Councillor Canning. Councillor Shortell?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was just trying to think a bit outside the box, really. I know we've got tremendous objectives towards the Dorset Climate Emergency Strategy, and we are liaising with many other agencies, such as energy companies and central government, what have you. Are we also combining our strategy, or perhaps our aspirations, with perhaps other elements within the Southwest area? For instance, like the Southwest Regional Development Agency, things like this, combining our approach to other approaches from other councils within the Southwest area. And, you know, if we're closely aligning that, will that not help us and actually develop our own Dorset strategy?
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Mr Selgren?
Thank you, Chairman. So in answer to Councillor Shortell's question, so Dorset LEP commissioned a piece of research which I'm more happy to provide to the clerks. That can be, the link to that can be available in the minutes. But the Dorset LEP produced a very good report on looking at sustainable energy supply in Dorset, and also dealing with that matter of grid capacity that we've come back to throughout this discussion. So the answer is yes. In that, as you'd expect from consultants, in doing a piece of research for Dorset and evidence in considerable detail in that, the other thing they did do was to just compare that more broadly with the area beyond, so the wider Southwest, and indeed into some national comparisons as well. So I would commend that report to members and say through the clerk, perhaps we can make that link available to you.
Thank you. Councillor Shortell, are you content with the answer? Thank you. Can I just go to page 38 at 6, well, between 6 and 6.4, and we talk about risk assessment. So risk assessment is currently is high, which is understandable. We've got reputational risk should we fail on this strategy. But obviously the risk assessments being set at high is obviously there's a significant financial cost to this council in bringing about this strategy. So that status of risk being high is going to be over a considerable period of time. Do we have factored in as to over what period of time that's going to be? Would we know that, or because it's going to be reflected in future budget settings? If our programme starts to slide and we're not meeting the quotas that we want to, then presumably the answer to that is going to be throw more money at it. And I appreciate we've got the finance director in the room at the moment, and there's probably a nervousness around him over this question. But presumably, if we're not meeting the quotas that we want to be, if our timetable starts to slide, it's going to cost us more to try and pull it back again and get to where we need to be to meet the date that we've set. So is it factored in as to how long we're going to be at that level of high risk?
Sorry. Thank you. I wouldn't say that necessarily that we factored in how long it's going to be at that high risk, but I think it comes back to the whole sort of program management approach about how you keep track of your progress and monitor your progress, and the governance that is set up around that. So one of the things which is also happening at the moment is strengthening the sort of internal governance around delivery of the strategy. So that will provide an opportunity for us to report up to senior management where progress is happening, where things aren't happening, which could then feed into the future budget processes or other prioritisation processes to try and get us back on track where we feel we're not. So I think the high reflects where we are at the moment rather than a sort of long-term thing. But obviously, when we start to make good progress, then if we make very good progress, that will come down.
Thank you. Okay. On page 42 at 12.2, with regards to the information given, where it's interesting to see the table and how we compare with other authorities, it would be interesting to see a table as to how we compare, because the information that you've given was extremely encouraging as to how we are comparing within the country, but there was no table as to how we compare with other authorities and a like-for-like authority, because I'm assuming that being such a rural authority, there are certain aspects of it that are difficult for us to deliver, that are more costly for us to deliver, and whether this argument is being taken to government in terms of the funding that we need, external funding that we need to bring this strategy about, and the fact that Dorset Council does face significant problems, being a rural community as we are, in delivering some of that. So I just wondered whether a table of other authorities and how we can compare ourselves to them may be beneficial to the members, so we get a more overview of it. And also, I think also that brings about some sort of competition as well, because you see how you're going against other authorities. And that maybe also feeding that out to our wider general public also helps them, as Councillor Brown said earlier, about getting that buy-in from the public with that change of culture, that change of mindset. Would it be possible to create a table around that for future reports?
I think going forward, that benchmarking exercise would be useful. There's sort of two parts to it. I think what's referred to in the report was an independent exercise done by an outside organisation that looked at all the local authorities and how they were delivering on their commitments to climate emergency, which put us into that sort of upper tier bracket. So through that exercise, that presumably they'll do that again, and that will start to be able to benchmark against other authorities. So that is possible, could do that. And on the carbon emissions side, we're also trying to work on using some of the nationally available tools that, for example, the LGA produce, which will then also enable benchmarking between authorities in terms of how we're doing on our own carbon reduction, which again, once that starts to build up, because everybody's starting to do that now, we'll be able to report and benchmark a little bit more. So yes, it would be good to do in the future if we could.
Okay, thank you. That's good to hear. But I appreciate it's probably early days, isn't it, as all the authorities are starting to come on board with this. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So I've got page 45 at 13.5, physical constraints of our electric grid. My understanding is we are 30 years away from any significant infrastructure increase in our energy from our energy providers. So when I sat on the AP with Councillor Suttle, I believe that was the information that came through to us. We were 30 years away from significant infrastructure delivery from our providers as it stands at the moment to increase the capacity of our electric grid within Dorset. So I'm just wondering what discussions are taking place to drastically shorten this time frame, and what discussion is taking place with government to give pressure to make this happen. Mr. Selgren.
Thank you, Chairman. So that is one of the issues that Stephen is picking up. As I said earlier, Councillor Farrar is very, very excited on that issue because there is a real reality. And I think as one of the members in the discussion this morning mentioned, we already have parts of Dorset where the lack of grid capacity is the thing that is holding back economic growth and of course, potentially the the rollout of more use of sustainable fuel sources. So yes, the council is intending to lobby government. I think the report that I referenced earlier that was produced by the LEP I haven't got it in front of me, so I'll take your quoted figure. But the intention is that the council would seek to make representation to government on that. We're now better understanding the landscape of that because there's quite a complex set of interrelationships between the power producers, the power distributors, and the regulator or regulators. And with Stephen coming on board and further work we're doing with the LEP, we hope to be able to clarify exactly where it is that we need to apply pressure into the system. But I certainly know that when we are clear about that, I know that both Councillor Bryan and Councillor Ferrari will be in the very front row of seeking to lobby government about needing some change, because it is very evident now, and we are clear about this, it's the regulatory environment that is holding this back. We know that the distribution companies and the producers are willing to go forward, but they are under considerable constraint by the regulator. So that's where the potential blockage lies, and therefore the bit that if this council wants to lobby on behalf of Dorset, that's where political pressure, in the broadest sense, needs to be applied.
Thank you, Councillor Selgren, because it sort of brings you on to the other point that's been made during this meeting, and that is that in terms of the electrical grid capacity, and we know that we said about balancing earlier that we've also got our industry within Dorset and our economy within Dorset that we've got to drive as well. And so our factories need electrical supply, as well as all the new build and the residential population that's increased within Dorset as well. So we've got this move to go down the route of electric vehicles. Now, we know we've got a debate going on, and we know there's a lot of talk going on nationally throughout the country, throughout the world, internationally, about what is going to be the best mode of transport provision in the end, and whether it's going to be electric vehicles or whether it's hydrogen, and exactly which route we're going to take. And unfortunately, it's sort of coming a bit early for us, isn't it? Because the technology and advancements that are still taking place on the different types of provision. So at the moment, with our own fleet, we seem to be going very much down the route of electric at the moment, and we're making that jump and making that commitment, or am I reading too much into this? How much of a risk are we at if actually hydrogen comes on and hydrogen turns out to be the better provider if we've invested a lot within the electric fleet at the moment? Thank you.
Chair, there may be a number of people who wish to help you in responding to that, but if I go first. So the point you raise about the potential that grid capacity is one of the things that limits our ability to roll out EV charging points, that is a live issue and one that's being discussed and looked at as we speak. I know that Councillor Bryan would wish to, with your agreement, speak on the matter of hydrogen and indeed the council's fleet, because as part of his portfolio he has oversight of that as well. And we have put in place a very clear plan for the intention to use alternative fuels in the council's fleet. Now, Anthony may want to say a little bit more about that in terms of the detail, but I do hope you perhaps look to Councillor Bryan and potentially Mr Ford as well to comment on that. But the point you raise is a very good one. I think just if I observe in terms of technology, it's the sort of classic, I think affectionately known these days as sort of the Betamax syndrome, where there are a number of different technologies that are emerging, and making the appropriate decision, the optimal decision at the optimal time about which of those technologies to apply is the real skill. That's to get the point of entry, to know that you're backing a technology which is moving positive and we're going to have more of, rather than the sort of Betamax syndrome of perhaps backing a technology that turns out not to be the optimal or preferred one. But to say, I think you might, if you might, Chairman, I know that Councillor Bryan has given this matter a lot of consideration and would like to speak on it, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr Selgren. Councillor Bryan, would you like to comment at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, John, for getting me into this. Funnily enough, yesterday I held a meeting with the fleet team, and so I have a reasonably up-to-date position to give you. Anything that is car-derived, we're looking at going electric. We're exploring all the manufacturers, and we have tested several of them. We're currently testing the potential of vehicles coming from sort of China, etc., for the localized use. But once we go above the car-derived area, then we're into a bit of uncharted waters, if I can use that term, in as much as you're quite right, Chair, that hydrogen is picking up momentum at the moment. And as I said earlier on, I'm on the way to visit one of the biggest truck manufacturers to look at their development of hydrogen engines, which they will have 1,000 out on test between now and 2025. And they intend to launch their hydrogen range by 2030 or before. I had a conversation with Stephen the day before, and we're both aligned to the fact that we can't afford to take risk. But what we can do, and again, we're in conversations with Aidan and his team as to how we can overcome the problem, because on the heavy end, I would like to swap straight away to HVO fuel. That unfortunately has a cost penalty, and that will affect the budget numbers. At the moment, it's approximately 25p a litre difference. So that has to come into consideration, because obviously the refuse vehicles burn a lot of fuel when they're out. So all this has got to be taken into account. But I can tell you now, we're not leaving a stone unturned as we try and find alternative ways of reducing the carbon emissions of the heavy fleet, but also making sure that we don't step into the wrong technology too early. I know there's a lot of pressure on me at the moment to start ordering electric refuse vehicles and things like that. But when you work out they're double the cost of the conventional vehicle, and in a rural area run the risk of running out of battery, because it's not just the miles we have to take into account, it's when the compactors work to crush the rubbish to the front end of the truck. That's when a lot of power goes out, and it will have a great effect on the batteries. So please be patient. There is a plan, and I think we're getting there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Did Mr. Ford want to come in at this point as well?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just to very quickly go on to back onto the grid issue. John's right that it is very complex, but it's of paramount importance that we start having those conversations with SSEN and Western Power as well. But one of the things that I know that other local authority areas are having to look at and are working with government on is the development of something called a local area energy plan. And to all intents and purposes, that is a highly detailed piece of work that looks at the decarbonisation of heating systems and transport mechanisms and generation, distributed generation that's coming online. What that does is it enables the district network operators to have a better understanding of where their investment priorities might be, which can then be used in conversation with Ofgem. I won't go into the complexities of it, but suffice to say that it is that level of detail that will be required to ensure that we can get the right strategic decisions taken in Dorset to help accelerate what sounds like a very long 30-year time frame, which obviously we don't have that luxury in terms of waiting that long. So it's a very, very high priority. And on the sort of the fleet question, I think Councillor Bryan's summed it up well. But just in terms of my role, it will just be ensuring that we accelerate that ambition, certainly in the smaller fleet vehicles to look at electrification, but for the larger plant vehicles and the like, is just making sure that we look at the emerging technology and look at what the economic opportunities might be, as well of linking in with what's happening in the hydrogen market as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Littlechild, did you wish to add anything? No, you're fine. Thank you. Okay, members. I just want to go to planning and a forthcoming local plan, and how it's going to fit in with this strategy. So we were told yesterday in the webinar that we had on planning that there's going to be a position statement that's being worked up at the moment in terms of how renewable energies are going to be incorporated into planning in the future, so that members in planning committees have a better understanding and hopefully a tool into which we can go into providing those renewables and new builds. But we've also commented about solar power and the need that's going to be within this county to provide more solar power farms. So we've had an instance where we've had a solar power farm that the committee went against an officer recommendation because the committee were in a position where they had to balance up the landscape and the value of the landscape as compared to providing a solar farm for the Dorset Council to commit to its climate emergency that it's committed to. And as I say, the committee went against the officer recommendation and voted for the solar farm. So we've already said that this strategy is going to cross directorates, that all the directors are going to talk together. And I just want an understanding of your team, Mr. Littlechild, as to how you are engaging with the planning team, how that's working. Are you being listened to effectively? Because there is a frustration within members in planning committees about actually being in a position where they can actually make a difference. At the moment, our local plan doesn't allow that. We've got an emerging local plan that will eventually come, which this will be incorporated into. And hopefully by that point, government will have moved a long way, and also in the help and planning. And I appreciate that government are dealing with planning law, so things don't move quite at pace at Westminster as we'd like them to. But those conversations, no doubt, are going on to change planning law to allow statutory planning authorities such as this to have a better understanding and a better ability of actually making developers put those renewable energies into these new build sites. So if I could just have an understanding as how those conversations are going, please.
Okay, thank you for your question. So there are two sides to it, I think. One is in terms of the emerging local plan. So we as a team have been engaged, as other teams have across the council, with developing the draft policies within that emerging local plan. So whether that's green infrastructure or renewable energy or housing or whatever it is. So that bit of work was sort of starting. If that's now sort of resting for the time being, there's an officer group which has been set up, which we also sit on, which is doing that bit of work, looking at what policy framework we have in place through the currently adopted local plans and what opportunities there are for moving forward and making the right decisions on some of these topics, particularly around renewable energy and energy efficiency in housing. So that's where the position statement is being developed to provide that first step in. This is where we are, this is the policy framework that we're working in, this is some guidance on how we could make the right appropriate decisions, and here are some of the options in terms of what we could do to try and strengthen our framework. So yes, we are engaged in that bit of work and those discussions.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Mr. Selgren.
Thank you, Chairman. So perhaps two parts to that. So one is, I think members of this council are aware that despite the change that government made to National Planning Policy Framework last July, which was a commitment to enable local planning authorities to have greater regard to climate and ecological sustainability, there is inevitably a catching up of policies required to do that. One of the things that we've done is facilitate a conversation between Mike Garrity's head of planning and Stephen Ford in his new role, see if we can do that quite promptly. On the wider matter of the local plan, members will know that the leader of this council is engaged directly with the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, on the matter of the Dorset local plan, but in wider terms in terms of the reforms that government intend to the planning system. One of the things that government has said about that is it is still mindful that despite that change made last summer, in the words of the Secretary of State, there is still insufficient opportunity for local planning authorities when preparing a local plan to give full and due weight to climate and ecological sustainability. And their commitment is that the next round of planning reforms that they're intending to bring forward in national policy and legislation will enable local planning authorities to do that. My understanding about the conversation the leader of this council is having with the Secretary of State is around whether there is scope for this council to begin to think about those things ahead of policy. Clearly, we cannot, as a council, move in advance of a national policy decision or a piece of legislation. But in as close as I guess we would ever get, government is asking us to provide that evidence of why these issues are acute in the way that you describe, as part of the evidence for the reforms that government is intended to bring forward. And if I may, I'd just like to acknowledge the very practical example, which is helpful, and we intend to put this forward to government as a very specific example. But very kindly, Councillor Fry produced me a very thoughtful and very accurate analysis of specific examples of the type that you described, Chairman. So I've got his note, and we are currently in the conversation that we're having with the government's Chief Planning Officer, putting forward evidence of that type to demonstrate the fact that national policy has not yet caught up with the aspiration around climate and ecological sustainability. So in the case of this council, we're working to a national policy planning framework, and of course we have a local climate and ecological sustainability strategy, which is perhaps more advanced in its thinking than government policies around that very same issue. But government's commitment is to deal with that potential policy contradiction. And we obviously look to emerging policy and legislation to see if they're able to enact that. But this council is very much part of that discussion in government.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. And yeah, as we've said, the national policy hasn't moved at pace to local government authorities such as this, and it must be the same up and down the country nationally. The frustration that there is in chambers up and down the country because we're trying to progress quicker than the government is. Thank you. Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, planning clearly extremely important in this. There's the other side of that coin, of course, which is building control, which we can't consider in planning, but which I'm assuming Mr. Littlechild and his team are talking to as well as planning. And I'm wondering what options building control have to try and tighten up on energy efficiency in homes, or factories or offices. All count. I'm just wondering if there are things that can be done within building control that perhaps we don't have control over in planning.
Mr. Littlechild, you might want to take it away and think about it, unless you've got an answer for now.
I've got a sort of standard answer, if I may, in terms of so obviously building control work within the statutory framework of the building regulations, which are increasing significantly, or have recently been increased significantly around the parts that relate to building energy efficiency. And then there's the Future Homes Standard, which is going to be introduced in 2025, which will again look at increasing those standards even further. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think that it's around sort of 30, the changes between the previous and the current, it's about a 30% increase in energy efficiency of a new building. So that's the framework within which they work. I think in terms of what we could do is part of it is around education and awareness and letting people know what they can do and sharing best practice about what you can do in your home in terms of low carbon technologies.
Thank you, Mr. Littlechild. Councillor Took, you happy? Thank you. Members, we'll move to the debate, although we seem to have debated it quite a bit. Has members got anything else they'd like to add? No? The recommendation was to review the progress of it, and I think there's a couple of things that we would need to add, I think, to it that have come out within the debate. One was the waive and tidal power, and whether the team could look into that type of provision going forward, and whether as the strategy expands out. Obviously, this is over a number of years this is going to be done, and the technology is going to be moving at pace on this as well. And I think, and also, obviously, we want to highlight the risks involved around the vehicle provision, particularly within the authority itself, from the EV, the potentials of the hydrogen power that's coming forward with the way that technology is advanced as well. And unfortunately, this is a team that your team is having to deal with, isn't it? It's the way the technology is advancing and moving, and you're having to make these calls at a very early date. So I do appreciate the difficult position that you're in. Did any member have anything else that they wish to highlight at this point? No? Okay. Obviously, Ms Watson will have taken the notes as well, and what will come out of that will be implemented into the report, into the minutes of this meeting. Thank you. Did you have anything else that you wish to add to that, Mr. Elgin? Okay, thank you. So, moving on to agenda item 10, which is the Place and Resources Committee Forward Plan. Ms Watson to run through it. Sorry.
Just quickly, just to highlight the items coming to the next meeting on the 5th of July, maintenance of principal and non-principal roads and the approach to funding, which came out of your review of the performance dashboard. And you've got your latest look at the performance dashboard as well to see if there's anything flagged up that this committee may need to focus on for future work. The rest of the work plan is as laid out. I won't run through it given the time probably.
Thank you, Ms Watson. And as Ms Watson says, we've got that meeting on the 5th of July, which we can run through our performance dashboard at that time. So we'll move to item 11, Cabinet Forward Plan. Ms Watson to run through the Court Forward Plan.
I mean, the next meeting of Cabinet is in June. There's a couple of items on the Cabinet Forward Plan. It's just to basically say the Cabinet Forward Plan is put on your agenda as a way of you keeping an eye on what items are going to Cabinet, therefore what decisions may be made. Is there anything there that you might want to bring in for a post-decision look at a later date? That's why we have it. So it's just on your agenda to flag it up if there's anything you want to think about putting onto your forward plan for a later time.
Members, I think we can pick that up on our 5th of July meeting as well. Okay. So if I move to item 12, urgent items, and there are none, and item 13, exempt business, of which there is none. So thank you, members. So a long meeting, I appreciate. So at 13:58. I can't see with the reflection on it. Sorry, I can't see with the reflection on it. The 13:58. I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers.